No, you're tweeting about us.
Yeah, I just started your live stream camera.
Oh, lovely.
Just so we're aware.
Super.
No, look, we're on
Hello,
television
Internet.
now.
We're here.
We're here and we're streaming to
Robin,
an audience of.
you gotta pose for a picture.
I got
Pose.
pose.
Yeah, well, not pose, but you know.
What do you mean? Trying to look, not like I look.
Like it's not 9:30 on a Monday morning?
And like your car didn't just get stolen.
Right.
Cute.
Nice.
Bitcoin.
Everyone's got people have badges. Why do you have badges? Do we give them badges?
You just grabbed one as you walked in the door.
Yeah.
I
just put your name
didn't
on it.
think to do that. Okay.
Oh, I didn't think to do that.
Richard clearly didn't know.
No one will know.
Did
who I
anyone
am.
email you about your session?
No.
You've got a session today. Chris should have emailed you. His excuse was he didn't have your email.
That's the reason.
I refrained
That
from
makes email different.
responding to
There's
Hey,
coffee.
yeah, there's all sorts of stuff that these lovely people are bringing in. I've got no clue
12:45.
what it is.
12:45.
What?
It's on today at
If you're
12:45.
telling me that is,
Yeah.
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 I think they accidentally put it in there, and some people took whatever's left from the bring it here. So
That's correct.
I think they just.
That's it. Yeah, this is what happens in the change rooms. Okay, shall we get going? I'll give me. Are you ready? You guys? Are
Yeah,
we working?
absolutely.
All right, I'll give you for a quick intro, then.
You guys
You
can
can
move
do
up
it.
if you wanted.
Yeah. All right. Hi everyone, how are you? Good morning. Thanks for coming. So this is the blockchain track of Austin Startup Week, which means it's about blockchain here today in this room. And we've got a few sessions that we're putting on. So Startup Week is something which Capital Factory here have put on for quite a few years. This is the first time they've run a blockchain track. They asked us, and we're the Austrian Blockchain Collective, to help them put it on. So in terms of kind of the content, we've kind of worked with them to do that. Boston Blockchain Collective is an organisation that advocates for, showcases blockchain and crypto innovation happening here in Austin. 120 companies here in Austin are doing blockchain and crypto things, and I know all of them, and they're doing great things. So this is one of the things that we're doing. This is actually the first day of what we're calling Austin Blockchain Month. There are at least 10 events happening during the month to do with blockchain. Most of them are free. And you're invited to come along to all of them. You can go to our website, austinblockchaincollective.com, to find out about all of them. We love blockchain and crypto, but we kind of need money to kind of keep doing it, and so that we don't have to do our boring day jobs. So we're thankful for some financial support from patrons and supporters. Actually, Wang Chain has been with us since the start, 6 months ago, and literally brought on them last week and 212 today. They've come out of stealth today. They're a company involved in security tokens. So thank you to those companies, and thank you also to these companies who also are providing support, either financial or in kind, and we couldn't do it without them. And that is the vital information for Austin Blockchain Collective, the website, our Twitter handle, a hashtag. If you tweet and use #Austin Blockchain, someone will like it and retweet it. And if you do Blockchain Month, that will, Austin Blockchain Month, this month, same thing will happen. So, that's the intro over. I'm going to hand over now to the first session. This is a live podcast recording with Michelle Ray and Dr. Robin Law from a company called Permission.io. Robin is a veteran analyst in the IT world and a blogger, and he's written a series of blogs called Ask Me Like I'm 5, which are really great kind of conversationally oriented introductions to Bitcoin and blockchain and crypto. And they're great things to read because they're very readable, but I asked Robin to come along to see whether he could kind of transfer the written word into the spoken word via a podcast. And it's an experiment, so we'll see. I'm sure it'll be fine. Michel's an expert podcaster, so I'm going to hand it over to you people to take it. They'll chat amongst themselves and they'll open up for questions as well. So you will be on a podcast, and actually you're being streamed live. So
We are not streaming you live, but apparently
They
Startup
are.
Week is, yes.
They are.
Yes.
Good. Any questions before I hand over? Great. Thanks all for coming.
Thank you.
I explained the format. I haven't quite started recording yet. We're gonna edit, so even if there's gaps and questions and things like that, don't worry about it. I'm not sure I'm an expert podcaster, but I'm gonna do a quick intro again of myself, so you know who I am, and for the podcast, and of Robin. Before I do that, we're a basic, I think this is a great starting point for Blockchain Week and the first blockchain track, but what's the general knowledge level of blockchain? Are we all kind of beginners, crypto beginners, a little bit of, okay, no, that's great, because I think this is a good place to start the week off, and for everybody who is not a beginner knows, without beginners, this ecosystem doesn't go anywhere. So give me just 1 minute, I'm gonna start the recording. Welcome to another long overdue episode of Gulchcast. My name is Michelle Ray. I am the creator and co-host of Gulchcast. I am also the communications director for a company called Permission here in the undisputed blockchain capital of the United States, Austin, Texas. We are kicking off Blockchain Month, put on by our gracious host, Austin Blockchain Collective, here at Capital Factory, which is currently hosting Startup Week, an annual event in Austin. We're thrilled to be a part of it, and I am joined this morning by Dr. Robin Bloor, who is our strategy officer at Permission, a long respected name in data analytics, author of several books, including some a little off topic we might discuss a little bit later on because they're interesting, and a crypto and blockchain enthusiast who's produced a series of blogs on Medium called Explain to Me Like I'm 5. Introducing blockchain and crypto to the rest of the world, answering all of the questions that developers are really, really bad at answering for the general population. Robin, I know I gave a really, really basic intro, but you have a long curriculum vitae, so if you wouldn't mind filling our live audience in and our listening audience on your creds, we'll get that out of the way.
Okay, well, and I guess the easiest way to describe me is that since about 1988, I've been a technology analyst. So I've made a living out of writing technology pieces to explain technology. And it's pretty much the whole sphere, from the hardware through to any kind of software to various kinds of applications. I've written books, I've produced a number of private reports. And I became interested in the blockchain about 3 years ago. I kind of heard about it a long time before that, but I came to the conclusion that it was real in the sense of this is going to be a technology trend that will not be stopped. So the question isn't really anything about the legitimacy of it anymore. The question is, what will it do?
And I think that's a really good place to start. Just so you guys know, I'm a social media director for lots and lots and lots of different companies and political campaigns, and I was introduced to Bitcoin in probably late 2012, early 2013. I bought my first Bitcoin back when buying Bitcoin was really hard. If you think it's hard now, you should have tried it back then. It was very cheap, and then I promptly forgot that I had it. until 2014. About that time, I became obsessed just with Bitcoin, with what blockchain technology could do, how quickly it could be done. I quit my day job and have dedicated almost all of my time to helping promote blockchain and crypto projects that I think are actually solving problems. And one of the biggest problems I've run into in doing that is most people only read headlines about Bitcoin, have no idea what blockchain is, and so I was really thrilled to get to work with Robin when I started at Permission, which will explain what Permission does because it's the perfect use case for crypto and blockchain in a little bit. But I want to get into, from the very beginning, what exactly is a cryptocurrency?
Okay. I guess we have to start with the technology. In other words, to ask about cryptocurrency, you first have to describe blockchain. I'm not going to do that to any technical level right now, but the blockchain is effectively a ledger. And you could also call it, if you wanted, a database. The fact that the technology works in a completely different way we can put to one side right now. It's a ledger that can record transactions, and therefore it's entirely possible to set up a blockchain which has underneath it a currency tied entirely to the blockchain on which every interaction between any two people holding a currency is recorded. So it's as if, I almost think of it in kind of Victorian terms with some guy with a quill pen writing entries in a ledger. The thing that makes it very important is it's incorruptible. So if something happens, it's immutable, it's happened. That's the nature of the blockchain. And that's what makes the cryptocurrency very interesting, because there is no other kind of currency about which you could say that. The other thing I think to say about cryptocurrencies is the blockchain itself implements the rules. So the extent to which it could spin out of control depends upon the nature of the rules. It's really kind of that simple.
So before we go any further, the difference between crypto and the difference between blockchain is something that baffles a lot of people. And so your explanation of blockchain being a ledger and crypto being the currency with which the transactions that are recorded on the ledger are exchanged, used between two people, I think is probably the simplest explanation of blockchain. One of the questions I get from a lot of people is, why is there only one blockchain? Is there only one, if it's just a ledger, why are there different blockchains?
That's just a competition thing. I mean, it's moved beyond cryptocurrency. So the blockchain as a technology can be used to record almost any kinds of transactions immutably. They don't actually have to be monetary transactions. So one answer to this question is there's a whole series of blockchains, a whole collection of blockchains that have been launched which have an underlying business model where the currency is actually a token that is used within the business model for various transactions to occur. And the easiest way to think about that is air miles. A crypto token is like an air mile. It lives within its ecosystem and it has a value. And the only difference between, let's say, American Airlines air miles and the cryptocurrency is the technology underneath and the fact that you know the rules. I have no idea what the rules are for any particular air miles, but you do know the rules for any of these tokens. There's a whole series of other currencies, cryptocurrencies, that are intended for payment and they have no other function. I know of at least 20, but I have no idea how many there actually are. That would be a blockchain where the only function of the blockchain is for people to make payments to each other, and that's it.
So you mentioned that blockchain is an immutable, incorruptible record of transactions. is it really, really uncorruptible? And how is it, if that's true?
Okay, well, this is where it begins to get a little complicated. It can't be answered simply, but I think the best way to start with blockchain is to mention the fact that it was invented by a guy called Satoshi, and that's not his real name, and nobody knows who he is. Well, actually, it's rumored that the NSA know who he is, but nobody else knows who he is. And he invented a blockchain, he tested a blockchain, he released the blockchain about 9 years ago for Bitcoin. And it's persisted ever since, and it's never been hacked. That is, the transactions have never been interfered with. However, it is possible, depending upon how the blockchain is created, for a blockchain to become compromised. So what you have with blockchains, in the same way that you would have with any kind of organization, you have rules of governance. And the attempt with most blockchain projects is to try and decentralize the number of people that can have a say to any changes in the code. If the code is frozen, then it can only do what it can do. But all of these blockchain projects, the blockchains are gradually evolving because developers are adding things. But the question is, who gets to say whether something can be added? So you could have the situation where a number of people that had interest in a blockchain gathered together, became dominant, perverted the code, and therefore perverted the blockchain. That's possible. There's no evidence that that's ever happened yet, but it's possible. And the rules of governance determine how possible it is.
So we've been, you and I, and probably some people in this room have been enthusiastic, evangelistic about blockchain underlying a lot of projects for years. Why? What makes blockchain so exciting that it captures headlines and development teams in places like Dell Children's, the military, IBM, Merck, Maersk, why are all of these multinational major corporations suddenly developing departments, assets, and devoting them to blockchain investigation?
Well, there are a number of things to be said about this, I guess. There isn't a single answer to this question, there's a number. First of all, an awful lot of people invested early in Bitcoin and some of the cryptocurrencies made a lot of money. That made headlines. That was an involuntary PR campaign for what was going on. So a large number of people became interested. A number of people stood up and said that cryptocurrency will replace fiat currency. They were predicting the demise of the dollar and the euro and the yen and the yuan and all of those. And I don't believe that that will happen, at least not in the way that people think it will happen. But one of the things is that if you get a stable cryptocurrency, and we could discuss what we mean by stable, but certainly one that isn't having a hugely volatile change in its price in relation to the dollar. If you have a stable cryptocurrency, it's a bank account. If you have a wallet and you regularly put crypto into the wallet and you can pay from the wallet, it's a bank account. Most of the banking industry exists off its ability to skim money off every payment that's made. That's the underlying business model of the banking industry. There are loads of things on top of that, so you can't really confine it to that. But the banking industry realized two things. This is why the banks are interested in cryptocurrency. They realized that cryptocurrencies can clear transactions at a fraction of the cost of the current means of clearing transactions. So if you had everybody using cryptocurrency, Western Union would be out of business. I mean, completely out of business, because the cost of making any transaction through them, I think, is about a $20 minimum. It's certainly very large. And you can clear crypto transactions for, at the moment, about 20 cents. And they clear in, well, within an hour is probably the best way to describe it, because it depends upon which cryptocurrency you're talking about. But they clear very, very fast. There isn't anything in the banking industry that clears within an hour. So it's faster, it's more secure, it's less expensive. So the banks are interested in the technology anyway because it can cut their costs. But they are in the situation of having to eat their own revenue stream if they actually go to cryptocurrency in that way. So I think the behaviour of the banks is not going to be competitive with independent cryptocurrencies. I don't think they can do it because it'll cost them too much.
You mentioned multiple cryptocurrencies.
Yes.
Is Bitcoin the best?
No. I would say definitely no, and that would be because people can have arguments about this, and I understand that various enthusiasms to particular coins can be based upon some kind of rational evaluation. The problem with the original Bitcoin model is it's got to the point where the cost of clearing transactions is very high compared to other cryptocurrencies. Now it varies, you know, minute by minute almost, the cost of clearing on Bitcoin, but the electricity cost is not invariable, it's very high. And the necessity of Bitcoin to actually continue to add new coins to the inventory of all the coins in order that it can mine, there are less expensive ways of doing that. So my expectation is that at some point in time Bitcoin will be superseded by a less expensive cryptocurrency. But if that doesn't happen for 2 or 3 years, I wouldn't be surprised either, because there is a very large amount of money sitting in Bitcoin right now, and it's not going to move on a whim.
So, on those two topics you just mentioned, let's see if you can actually explain these to someone like they're 5. And we'll stick with Bitcoin because that's what people are most familiar with, but the process by which people who do not buy Bitcoin come to own Bitcoin or create Bitcoin is called mining.
Yes.
The process, though, is not a familiar process to most people. So, like I'm 5, how does Bitcoin mining actually work?
Okay, so we'll confine this to Bitcoin. Basically what a blockchain is a chain of blocks of data. And the way it works is when a new block is created, it is linked via an immutable hash code to the previous block. So they're all chained together. Somebody has got to create those blocks. So what you actually have in the case of Bitcoin is you have a large number of independent servers, there's over 1,000 at the moment, that take all the transactions that are arriving, create blocks of transactions out of them, and try and add the block to the blockchain. This has from a security perspective, this has the virtue that you've no idea which server is actually going to create the next block. But in order to do that, the original idea was that there would be a hard problem that individual servers had to solve. And the hard problem is actually a kind of crypto problem, cryptographic problem. But basically they have to create a kind of hash in order to define the block, and they have to get what is some kind of a solution within certain bounds. So they're all chugging away trying to do that until one of them gets an answer which is known to be right. It creates the next block, and everybody's on to trying to create the block after that. When the block is created, it's not normally confirmed. In the sense of when there are businesses out there or people out there that have sent a transaction through, if it gets onto the blockchain, once the block is confirmed, it's still theoretically possible to interfere with it. So the transactions are normally confirmed when the block after is created, and then the previous block is immutable, it can't be changed. Nothing within the system can change it. So that's the point at time when you know that the transaction you've sent has been immutably validated. So that's the situation. Now, the miners get a reward for creating a block. I think at the moment with Bitcoin, I think it's 4 Bitcoin or something per block. It's a significantly high reward anyway. So they've got a financial incentive to create the block. So their electricity costs and their whatever labour costs they have, but it's not very high, are paid for by the newly minted Bitcoin that create through each block.
The current mining reward is 12.5 Bitcoin.
It's 12.5. Oh, really?
Which brings me to my next question. Much has been made about the electricity cost of mining Bitcoin, and I am going to stick with Bitcoin just because it's most familiar. And is it still profitable for an individual to set up a server to mine Bitcoin?
Okay, well the easiest way to explain this is to go through the history of what happened. So originally it was, if you like, almost a science project, and Nakamoto and Satoshi created the original block for the blockchain and set the whole thing going. And at that point in time, anyone with a PC could start mining coins. And then it became, I mean, I don't know exactly what point in time, but at a certain point in time it became obviously profitable to mine Bitcoin. And the price had gone up to something, I think, about $3 or $4 per Bitcoin when it just became obvious to everybody to do that. So there became a competition to be the person that, or to be the server that completed the next block. So the first thing that happened is it moved from PCs and everybody's spare computer onto a server that was devoted entirely to mining Bitcoin. And the competition persisted, and it became obvious that if you actually use GPUs rather than CPUs, then you could mine faster and you're more likely to win the reward. So it migrated to GPUs. And that eliminated an awful lot of people who had been mining, because now if you wanted to mine Bitcoin, you had to buy a server with GPUs. And you might as well buy one that was configured precisely to do the work, and you might as well buy one that was going as fast as it possibly could. And at that point in time, people started thinking about electricity costs, because it had already become significantly expensive to actually run this kind of mining operation. But the Chinese, or a Chinese fabricator, realized that it'll go faster on an ASIC, I'm not sure what ASIC stands for, automatically.
Application specific integrated circuit.
Thank you. So this is a piece of silicon that runs precisely that program and nothing else. Right. So there became a movement into ASICs, which pretty much eliminated people. At that point in time, the electricity was getting expensive, so people started locating the Bitcoin mining places close to cheap electricity. And the Chinese became dominant because there's, in northern China, there are a number of power, I think coal-powered electricity installations that were incredibly inexpensive. So all of the ASICs, well, not all of them, a lot of the ASICs moved to northern China. And since then, there's been a search for cheap electricity. And then there were generations of ASICs because silicon increases in its capability over time. So every couple of years, new ASICs were created. So this became a kind of huge competition. The price of Bitcoin kept going up, became more and more rewarding to do it. And therefore, there was just this explosion. And now it's estimated that the cost of mining Bitcoin in electricity terms is similar to a country the size of Ireland in terms of its electricity demand, which is way too expensive, in my opinion, for the dominant cryptocurrency, which is why I think it'll pass to something else eventually.
So that was really hard for a 5-year-old to say. Let's go back a little bit to actually acquiring Bitcoin. In the very beginning, the beginning as I knew it, which was obviously post Nakamoto, and you had to know enough to go download a program, set it up, follow a set of about 41 directions to point it to a block and the hack. It was complicated to just get a Bitcoin. And that was if you were trying to mine your own. Back then it was far easier to mine. You didn't have to be a genius to do it, but you had to be able to follow instructions, know your way around a computer. It wasn't too long after that. I'm thinking I actually bought my first Bitcoin off of a BBS. I'm dating myself now. A group of 4 or 5 people in Louisville, Kentucky, of all places, had Bitcoin. They had a lot of Bitcoin, a lot. Some guy had 45,000 Bitcoin, and back, it was worth nothing. I mean, literally nothing. And he wanted to see if anybody was interested in buying it, so he could just test sending it from one wallet to another. You downloaded this program. With this program also came the ability to create a wallet. It was not fast. The wallets had to sync with the blockchains. Sometimes it took a day for this to happen. Now, however, even though you will hear people complain about the difficulty in acquiring Bitcoin, it is a far simpler process. What is the easiest way right now if I'm brand new and I want to go buy myself a Bitcoin at the current rate of $6,600-ish as I last look? What's the simplest way for me to do that?
Well, in America, certainly the simplest way is to just go to Coinbase. So what happened is a number of businesses set themselves up as exchanges. The first one was Mt. Gox. It got hacked and it was a disaster for the Bitcoin price. The popularity of Bitcoin had got to the point where I think it hit $1,000. But then somebody hacked Mt. Gox and walked away with a lot of the Bitcoin that were on Mt. Gox. It wasn't particularly secure. And enthusiasm for Bitcoin collapsed considerably until I think it lost 80% of its price, something like that. But then in the US, Coinbase set up, and basically Coinbase, you just give your financial details and you can buy Bitcoin and you can buy Ether, and they're expanding, adding new coins. And this is really no different to using a broker like TD Ameritrade or E-Trade or something to buy stock. You can buy Bitcoin just like that. They hold it for you, right? You can transfer it out of those places into your own wallet. So if you're particularly security conscious, which is what I am, my Bitcoin is all in wallets that are private wallets. Actually, I've got a hardware wallet, which is an especially secure wallet. But at the end of the day, a wallet is just like a bank account, except this is one under your control.
So if Coinbase is the easiest way, how familiar are you with ways that don't involve exchanges to acquire Bitcoin?
Yes, there's always. When I first found out about local Bitcoin, it was, if you like, it felt like it was dealing drugs or something. But there's an organisation called Local Bitcoin where people will actually sell you Bitcoin on the street. No one will know that transaction occurred. So it can go from, if I was the dealer, it could go from my private wallet to your private wallet without anybody knowing that happened. In other words, my private wallet's anonymous, yours is anonymous, and it just passes from one to the other. You can buy it on the street. The street price is different than the exchange price. The street price depends entirely upon the person that's trying to sell it. But there's a website that backs all this where you can make contact with people who can buy and sell Bitcoin on the street.
So one of the terms we haven't mentioned, although we've danced around it quite a bit, and one of the big use cases for cryptocurrency in general is peer-to-peer.
Yes.
Which is, I think, the experience you get when you go to a meetup and you sell or transfer Bitcoin or Litecoin or Ethereum or Ripple or any of the other hundreds of cryptocurrencies or crypto tokens that are out there. The appeal to me, to Bitcoin initially, was interesting because I at the time was in a completely different career. I actually had a retail business that expanded, very quickly around the globe. Thank you, internet. But I was a small work-at-home mom. I was a shop. I didn't have an accountant. I certainly didn't have a broker. I didn't have a bank account where exchanging money, if I was doing business in Kuala Lumpur, was very easy. PayPal was not all that easy at the time if you were doing international. And so for me, the idea was, what if I could sell my product to my retailers in Australia, my retailers in France, my retailers in Asia, and there was no paperwork. There was no exchanging currencies. There was no dealing with the federal government saying, we have to verify this money came from a legit source. If you've ever done business overseas through PayPal, you'll notice a slightly more significant delay in transferring money because of some federal regulations concerned with terrorism and things like that. And so for me, I did my first real, not in-person peer-to-peer transaction with a woman in Kuala Lumpur to exchange products. She paid me in Bitcoin. The process at that time took about 12 and a half hours, only because we had to sync our blockchains and wallets. And that to me was the light bulb that went on. Improving business transactions, being able to prove that she had sent me the money without having to get a third party to verify this. I could go literally online and look up, at this time this was around mid-2014, actually very rudimentary blockchain explorers existed for Bitcoin. That independence for me was a big part of why blockchain appealed. The interaction between you and I, the immutable record of that transaction without a third-party verification system. Why is, aside from speed and cost, peer-to-peer so appealing to a lot of the people who have backed Bitcoin early on?
Yeah, we could go into this in different directions, but the first and immediate appealing thing is peer-to-peer is global. There isn't anything between you and the person you're dealing with. So the example of Kuala Lumpur is really a very good example. It was really difficult to do business at that distance and orchestrate payment. I mean, there are probably other things that are difficult aside from the payment, but to orchestrate payment, to be able to do it without actually having to have letters of credit or anything like that, but to simply do it on the blockchain is very appealing. There is at the moment a large number of people who are Japanese working in the Philippines who send money back to Japan, and they're all doing it now via crypto. I think Bitcoin was the major major reason to do that. And a whole series of services have now been built on top of this peer-to-peer capability. The thing about peer-to-peer, though, the thing that's absolutely revolutionary about it, which most people will possibly not be aware of, is that the internet as it exists right now is actually hierarchical. It's not peer-to-peer. And the whole of blockchain technology and a large number of people who are working in that area are trying to turn the whole of the internet into a peer-to-peer arrangement. And it will happen. Unless somebody stops those projects, it will happen, because technically there's no reason why it can't. So this kind of, at the user level, understanding what peer-to-peer means, if the whole of everything underneath it is also peer-to-peer, you will get more and more confidence in the peer-to-peer nature of what's going on. You'll feel less and less threatened by any kind of authority of any sort intervening in what you're doing. It won't be able to be stopped.
On that note, we might as well address the elephant dancing around the room. Bitcoin has made headlines for going on 7 years now about nothing good. Bitcoin became popular in mainstream news because of very headline-worthy things that were happening in the Bitcoin ecosystem. I actually hate that phrase. I prefer Bitcoin economy, which I'll get to that in just a minute. But at the time, it really wasn't an economy. Some of the first uses of Bitcoin in an economy were bad. They were just, well, depending on who you were and what your politics are, they were bad. And they made headlines. That's how Bitcoin got famous. And after the, oh my gosh, drug users and gun runners are using Bitcoin, you mentioned Mt. Gox, which most people who've been in Bitcoin a while cringe and get a little nauseous every time they hear Mt. Gox. Hacks became big news, Mt. Gox being the biggest and most disappointing, but certainly not the first and definitely not the last. And a lot of people are confused when you say cryptocurrencies, blockchains are immutable and incorruptible, and then they hear about a hack. So explain to me, like I'm 5, how a blockchain and a crypto ledger can be incorruptible and immutable and secure, and your money can still disappear.
Okay, well, the first thing to say is that if your money is in your wallet that you control, it can't disappear except by you revealing your private key to someone. It's really rare that any kind of hack occurs against a private wallet. They would have to have some way of persuading you to reveal your private key. There are some people that have been scammed like that, but it's very rare. When we're talking about exchanges, the question is really, how does the exchange work? So in order for the exchanges to be able to transact very quickly between one cryptocurrency and another, they hold money in, you could call them wallets if you want, on the exchange itself, but the exchange software has got to be able to get at that money in order to change it. You do not have your personal control over the money that you've put on an exchange, unless in some way or other the exchange is guaranteeing that, gives you a wallet and allows you to have a private key. Otherwise you don't, and that money is therefore at risk, and it depends upon how good the software of the exchanges is in order to be able to secure that. And what's happened is that exchange after exchange after exchange, there was a recent one in Japan, I think, where 50 million went missing, have failed to build secure software for the management of the money that's on the exchange for trading. So that's the issue. People who are concerned about that probably are not going to spend much time on exchanges. because every time you put anything onto an exchange, it is theoretically at risk.
So if holding your crypto on an exchange is not generally recommended, what are your other options?
Right, there are a number of options depending upon how paranoid you actually are. Really, you can hold it in a wallet on your phone, but if somebody gets into your phone, they'll be able to transact. You can hold it in a wallet on your PC, but if somebody gets into your PC, they may be able to transact. They would need to have had a fairly healthy hack of your PC, because you will probably have a password on your wallet, almost certainly you'll have a password on your wallet. So they would have to keylog your password. They would have to watch you enter it, record that, and then come in some other time and start trading. You need to do that. If that's not secure enough for you, if you don't feel happy with that, you can get hardware wallets. The Trezor is an example of one of those, and I've got one and I've used it. The Trezor, the private key is held on a hardware device you plug into your PC in order to use, but it doesn't interact with the PC. It creates a direct connection to a wallet that you can trade from, which is secure, that's out there on the internet. So the only possible hack of that would be your wallet that's out there on the internet getting hacked, and most of them, I don't think that's ever been hacked. You know, there's another one called the Ledger, or probably more. So you can hold that, or if you want, you can print off your wallet on paper and just delete it from your machine, in which case you're going to have to put it back in order to trade, but you can hold it on paper. So it's possible for you to look after your own security. At this point in time, I think it's only people who are enthusiasts that do all of that kind of stuff. But I do. Do you do it?
Yeah, I'm not a trader. I say this very, very often, and that's when I want to go back to why I prefer crypto economy versus crypto ecosystem. Trading cryptocurrencies, whether it's Bitcoin, whether it's Ether, whether it's Litecoin, whatever it is a, in my opinion, a necessary evil for us to get to adoption. The economy, in order for cryptos to become so mainstreamed that you don't think about using one as being different, requires the confidence of an entire economy. People who hold this crypto securely and make it accessible to you, like exchanges, people who think it is a good investment and a good store of their wealth, and so they're willing to trade their whatever asset, fiat dollars, into cryptocurrency and hold them for whatever investment purpose, whether it be retirement, whether it be something like an ETF. I mean, it also requires retailers to be willing to accept cryptocurrency, and the people with the most money to lose are going to be the first people to get into it. And so for me, I call myself an evangelist, not just of Bitcoin, but of the idea of cryptocurrency and personal control and personal security and all of that. And so becoming familiar with the parts of the economy and recognizing that they're all necessary, to me, has been a big part of learning about blockchain, how it interacts both with the provider of whatever product, whether that be the cryptocurrency itself or a retail good, and me as a consumer, whether I'm buying cryptocurrency or trying to spend it for a product, understanding that this chain of economy is just like any other. We all got used to ATMs, some of us who were around before ATMs, got used to ATMs, we all got used to PayPal, we got used to credit card, we got used to telephone banking. This is no different. The difference in this is now FUD, is because this isn't controlled by a central authority that is promising you security, whether you believe in that promise or not. That does not exist with most 99.9% of crypto assets out there. the difficulty in getting people enthusiastic about cryptocurrency beyond I might make 20% or 2,000% as the case may be. To use cryptocurrency is comfort. And that's really hard with headlines the way they are, with people thinking the only use for it is to try and make a quick fiat dollar. And so to Robin's question, I use my Bitcoin like I use fiat dollars. I have a savings account that is on a hardware wallet that I contribute to on a regular basis. I get paid I do a lot of gig work. I get paid in cryptocurrency as much as possible. I've been doing that since late 2015, 2016, been getting paid in crypto. I spend some. There are retailers. I buy every flight that I take, every rental car that is done with crypto. Hotel rooms I pay with crypto. I pay my contractors with crypto. They can figure out how to exchange it if they want to use the dollar. I'm an adopter. I'm an evangelist. The economy doesn't happen without people who invest in ETFs, people who store it as wealth, people who spend it, and people who accept it. So for me, that has been the difficult message to get across to people who are new to blockchain and crypto is, as Robin said, it's not going anywhere. It's here to stay. Ask Dale Children's up the street. They're here in Capital Factory at least twice a month at blockchain meetups talking about how to implement it. You can ask the US Army, which is downstairs right now, meeting with the guys at Capital Factory. Blockchain exploration is part of what they do. You can talk to CheapAir, which has been accepting Bitcoin, and Overstock.com, which has been accepting Bitcoin for purchases for several years now. So the idea for me, for this series with Robin, for my involvement is, it's really, really complicated until you realize that it's not. The average person doesn't need to know how a blockchain works. They don't need to know what an ASIC miner is. They don't need to know anything about ETFs. They just need to know that you can buy, hold, sell, and spend all cryptocurrencies that are out there right now. The difficulty may be finding the market for the buying and selling, but they do exist, and it is a full economy. It's not a bunch of developers sitting around thinking they're going to take over the world. Okay, there are a bunch of developers sitting there thinking they're going to take over the world, but there are useful purposes for both the underlying technology under cryptocurrencies and for the currencies and tokens themselves. And we may one day get into the difference between a crypto and a token, but I think that's a whole other show. We have about 15 minutes left, and I'm going to just keep our podcast recording going. But before I take questions, to address the mention earlier, reward is roughly 12.5 Bitcoin per mined block. Mined blocks happen right now about every 10 minutes. There are roughly 17,200,300 Bitcoins already mined, leaving us just shy, 4 million, just shy of
Yeah, it's about
4 million-ish left to be mined by 2021, is when they're thinking they'll be, or 2041, sorry, is when they're thinking they'll be mined. And that is an interesting date because that has been revised as technology gets better. Which to me is one of the most interesting things about Bitcoin, is watching how fast technology attempts to keep up with making mining effective, cost-effective, profitable, and decentralized. The one thing we did not cover during the podcast is the word decentralization, and it's important in I'm going to stick with Bitcoin because it's not important in all cryptocurrencies or all crypto tokens. But before we get asked, why is decentralization so important in sticking with Bitcoin and the blockchain that underlies Bitcoin?
Well, with Bitcoin, the decentralization really is about the miners. That is that the whole thing could be, if you like, pushed off in another direction if one or a small group of miners dominated. They would have the power to determine the direction. The coin would fork if that happened, but the problem is that the governance really is in the hands of the miners. The decentralization into thousands of servers makes you think that that kind of cartel is never going to emerge because it's in nobody's interest. And that's the whole point of decentralization. You're trying to, in one way or another, make everybody in the ecosystem a stakeholder. And therefore, if you manage to do that, no matter how you manage to do that, but it's being done with mining in Bitcoin, if you manage to do that, then the possibility of it ever moving off course from what is original intention diminishes quite dramatically. So a lot of the other coins have introduced, like Tezos for instance, which launched about a year ago, introduced different rules of governance to make it even more likely that the whole thing will become incredibly decentralized. And with decentralization, there is a much greater difficulty with the coin ever deviating from what its original intent was.
Yeah. So we're going to take questions for however long you guys have them. I think we have the room for 15-ish more minutes. Any questions in particular for? Start here.
Okay. So the PC industry had two big phases, Gates and Jobs. To what extent is it an advantage that we don't know who Satoshi Nakamoto is? And to what extent is it, does it help, does it not help?
It's an interesting question in a way. Everybody would make him into a hero like Tim Berners-Lee if his identity was known. He obviously didn't want to be known because he hid his identity really very effectively. What actually happened was that in the Obama years, I think it happened about 3 or 4 years ago, the US government started to be concerned that Bitcoin might be something that was being used, was intended to undermine the US. And whether there was or wasn't any reason to believe that, they set the NSA onto finding out who Nakamoto was. What they did was that all the evidence they had about him was emails he'd written. So what the NSA did is it took everything that it had its hands on that had ever been written in English by anyone and started doing pattern matching in terms of the use of words. And the rumour out of the NSA is they know who the individual is and he's not a foreign operative. So that's it. Right, that's it about Nakamoto.
So do you think, this is always, actually my 15-year-old has asked me this question. If it turned out that the creator of Bitcoin was a 16-year-old kid, would it undermine the credibility of Bitcoin today? Or if it turned out that it was a government official, would it undermine the credibility of Bitcoin today? So does it really matter? Would it be a negative thing? In my mind, it would be. I mean, I kind of like the mystery and the here, do with this what you will thing that we have now. But do you think it would undermine the enthusiasm for a lot of the crypto community if we found out his identity, her identity, their identity?
I think that's too late. And I think if the identity had emerged 5 or 6 years ago, it might have made a difference. But I think it's now too late. And the thing to realise is that Nakamoto published a paper and the code was open source. So it was all out there, so he actually could disappear and it didn't matter anymore because all his thoughts about how it should be were written down and all the code that was governing it at the time that he ceased to be part of the project was open sourced. And that's what's happened with the whole of the crypto movement. Virtually, it's not all, but virtually all of the cryptocurrencies open source their code. So if you want to create one identical to one that already exists, you can take their code and start doing it now. So there's that level of transparency going on. There are companies that are trying to create patents. There are companies that are trying to be entirely private about what they're doing with a cryptocurrency, but most of them are just out there. And you can check it. It's all on GitHub, where all of the software code is published. You can investigate who's working on any particular project and so on. If you do the research yourself, you can know. And that's why I think it's way too late to stop it. And I think the other thing is that worth mentioning, because it has been so many headlines, the currency that's used for criminal activity by a vast majority of criminals is called the dollar. That's the currency that's used.
Yep, cash is king. The US dollar is king in the criminal world.
And Bitcoin is actually an open ledger, so that if you can tie a Bitcoin address to an individual, you know who they were if you can do that tying of addresses. It's also rumoured that the three-letter agencies know who owns every wallet, or know who, with every wallet, knows what they can about anybody that owns a wallet. So, you know, that information is, it's not impossible to conceal, but it's difficult to conceal. And most people don't care, so they don't conceal it, you know. So that's kind of out there. The Bitcoin transactions themselves are all published, so you can see what moved when and at what time, and you can check the dollar price at that particular time. It's all there in an open ledger. There are some currency, Monero is one, Dash is another, Zcash is another, where you can obscure your transactions and they can't know who made them. Right? Those are distinctly different currencies, and I think if the IRS is worried about anything, that's what they're really worried about. They're worried about people disguising transactions so they can avoid paying their taxes. We would never do that.
We're not, yeah, we are not having that discussion. Anybody else have a quick, before we go in the back? Then
Hi. Could you talk about what are some of the more reputable wallets?
well, I'm happy to tell you, I personally use a wallet called Edge
Okay.
for my, the stuff I hold on my phone. I have a Ledger Nano for my cold storage, my hardware wallet, but my day-to-day wallet is Edge. And they used to be Airbeds. I've used them since 2016, 2015 maybe. Know the team personally. They're really, really responsive, really forward-looking. Security is first and foremost in their minds. You have the ability to buy. You can set up an in-app exchange account if you want to buy that way. Very simplest, no harder than using PayPal on your phone. It's a very user-friendly wallet. I also happen to have a MyEther wallet and a MyCrypto wallet. I don't hold anything in them. They have had splits among the teams. That concerns me when there are issues among the core team. So I use them for purely functional purposes, as in moving Ether back and forth, or ERC20 tokens. But I don't hold anything there, but they're perfectly functional, easy to use, relatively user-friendly wallets. But if you're looking for a beginner wallet, my personal recommendation is Edge.
Thank you.
Yeah, I would go with that as well. I mean, I use my Ether wallet in conjunction with the Trezor, and I keep everything on the Trezor until or when I want to transact in any way. It's all on the Trezor. And Edge is the one that I eventually settled on as well, actually. But that might have been the influence of Mitchie.
Is there an estimate of how many blocks there are in Bitcoin environment?
Here, I can tell you how many blocks have been mined as of this particular moment. Total blocks mined, 543,940.
543,000, okay.
Okay, so question about that sort of,
Sure.
and the decentralization and everything. You talk about how Bitcoin, or I guess most any blockchain is a ledger,
Yeah.
essentially. Is it one giant ledger hosted on every server, or are there multiple ledgers
There's a copy on every server.
out there? There's a copy of
With
basically
Bitcoin,
every
yeah,
transaction
it's
that's ever occurred
different.
is all tied to the same
Yeah,
file.
it's all
essentially?
on the same file. all on the servers. They
Yeah,
keep a copy.
yeah, so, one of the other terms we didn't talk about that kind of applies to decentralization, that makes it work, is consensus. So, yes, in Bitcoin's case, there is a copy of the entire blockchain on every server that hosts the blockchain. Blocks don't get added to the blockchain until the consensus is agreed upon that that's what belongs in that block.
Is it like a percentage of the participating servers that have to
They have to agree.
Yeah.
Yeah, there's a consensus. That's why it's called a consensus. They
I
have
don't
to
know
agree.
what the percentage, I know,
Well, if they didn't agree, you would get a fork in the chain.
Mhm.
So basically what happens, they haven't got a lot of time, you know, and if you take Bitcoin, let's say the server that I am has mined the latest block, they need to be on to the next block. So if they didn't go on to the next block and they voted for a different block to be the next block, you would have a fork in the chain.
right, I mean,
This-
we're kinda getting into proof of work versus.
Yeah,
Yeah, so for further research, the proof of consensus mechanism for Bitcoin is called proof of work. There are a couple of others, proof of authority, proof of stake, but Bitcoin uses proof of work, and there is an algorithm requirement of all of the servers participating and hosting the blockchain to agree before they move on to the next block, and that's part of the algorithm solving process and taking over of publishing the next block. Rachel!
So as more servers are added, is that supposed to make the transaction, is that supposed to make the next block being created happen faster? Or does it take longer because now more people,
It's a race,
Yeah,
right?
it's a race. It's fractionally longer because you've got a larger network. Everybody has got to be informed. You have a network of 1,000 computers,
Yeah.
and you know this one has won. Everyone has to be informed. Add another server, and there will be a fractional difference in the time it takes, but not anything significant. And you know, and this is it because it does happen with some of the blockchains. If you get a fork, the inferior fork dies very quickly because nobody wants to touch it. You know, so the majority rules, and that's the way that most of the blockchains are governed, that the majority rules.
So with all these new servers coming up and everybody having to vote, I understand it's taking more and more energy to process and mine a Bitcoin and see a transaction. How does the cost of running a transaction, the energy cost of the environment compared to that of like a credit card payment transaction right now?
I don't know that you can get a per transaction cost. I mean, I'm gonna assume right at this moment, mining Bitcoin again, a transaction for Bitcoin can be 1,000 Bitcoin, or it can be 1/8 of, whatever, 1/16 of a Bitcoin, whatever. So I think at this point, it's probably safe to say that mining is, a single transaction for Bitcoin is probably more expensive. But,
Are we talking like by a factor of like
oh,
2, 10, 1,000?
I couldn't even tell you, but Bitcoin transactions the world over use a significantly, by a factor of who knows what, I mean, this is something you can Google, less than banking, just banking. Not even moving money around, but literally just storing your money. So add credit card transactions, add banking transactions, add exchange and financial transactions, add IMF transactions, global bank, I mean, so there's no way for me to tell you right now, oh, Bitcoin is forever gonna be cheaper. Logically, it would be ridiculous for me to say that it wouldn't be. The time, the energy it takes to actually move money peer-to-peer involves significantly less infrastructure than it does for me to move $1 unless I physically hand it to you. But even just producing that dollar, getting it into your hands, involves a greater, huge amount of infrastructure. Try and do that paying Kuala Lumpur from Austin, Texas, and now you've involved global infrastructure that is upkept and improved upon and secured and staffed, and I think it takes a lot of hubris to think that technology won't improve to the point where this peer-to-peer technology is far more efficient, effective, and less expensive, both in terms of infrastructure costs, maintenance costs, security costs, and impact to use in 5 to 10 years. And it moves, development of these kind of things moves so much faster now. Global input into technology means increases in, to the factor of 1,000 in how fast things become more effective and more cost effective and useful.
So somebody did do some kind of analysis to compare the average banking transaction with the average Bitcoin transaction and concluded that banking was more expensive if you took everything into account. I have no idea whether that particular study was really well done or whether it was just kind of on the back of an envelope kind of thing.
Or if anybody knows.
Yeah, it would be a very difficult comparison to make. But the thing to understand is that most of these other governance, aside from proof of work, the cost of proof of work is you're making a lot of computers run an algorithm. Most of the proof of stake, proof of authority kind of approaches don't do that. And what you can do if you've got like 1,000 servers, you can randomly select which ones get to do the block. Right, just select 5 of them. So then you've got 5 out of 1,000 running at this particular point in time. So you can really pull down the electricity costs compared to what happens with Bitcoin. No algorithm, just have a random selection of things, and you do well.
Question, I think it follows a couple of those ideas. What would it take today, and what are the challenges of adoption, of using Bitcoin with a much larger audience? What are some of the challenges? Bitcoin or, crypto?
Well, if everybody who said, I think crypto or Bitcoin is a good idea, and I'd like to see it get adopted it, that would go a long way.
I'm saying, what are the current
but those are the challenges. Even those who are enthusiastic about the possibilities haven't started to use it. A lot of people, and having a conversation where it's not just a store of value, it's not just used, you have to get people over the idea that it's not a currency, that it can be used. Most people I talk to, and I talk to a lot of people on social media, they're still very vague about why Bitcoin is useful. And that is the difficult thing. People are so very used to this thing in their hand that a central government has given a value to, that they cannot wrap their minds around value driven by consensus. I regularly tweet the US dollar valuation of Bitcoin because I find it interesting. It's based on nothing. It's based on sentiment, markets, what consensus says. But to me, the fact that there is a consensus about the value of a Bitcoin means that there is at least beginning acceptance that it has value. That, I think, is the biggest thing, is getting people's minds wrapped around the idea that it's a no different currency than any other currency. If you're willing to accept pesos or you're willing to accept chickens, they're currencies. And this works exactly the same way. It's very hard, I think, to get people to wrap their minds around the fact that no central agency determines its value.
If you're looking for a technical, the situation changes with Bitcoin itself, so it's very difficult to actually say the technical capabilities at this point in time compared to anything else. But if you look at the cryptocurrency as a whole, it's just getting cheaper and cheaper in terms of running transactions on blockchains. So if Bitcoin fails for its expense, another thing will come in that's way less expensive that will do exactly the same thing and be used in exactly the same way. The dollar is not going to disappear. Right? And I'll just say this because it's kind of an interesting thing. There are 2 things a cryptocurrency cannot do. It cannot be passed hand to hand like a dollar note. There is no equivalent of a bearer bond, which is what a dollar note is or what a quarter coin is. The person that carries it owns it. Even if they just stole it from someone down the street, the person that carries it owns it. There is no equivalent in crypto. There is also no equivalent of fractional reserve banking. In other words, you can't invent money with a cryptocurrency. You can't take, 1,000 Bitcoin and lend out 10,000 on the basis of 1,000. It isn't allowed. So either fractional reserve banking disappears entirely, or it will continue to exist with dollars. And, the bearer dollar is going to continue to exist. It's required for the economy. So cryptocurrency isn't going to replace those things. It's going to replace checking accounts. And that's a huge thing.
Yeah, I think we've run a bit over, a little bit. I'm probably gonna grab a cup of coffee in the back, and I'm sure I can talk Robin into staying if anybody has questions, but I know there's another event coming in. Thank you, guys. You can find Robin on Twitter at Robin Blorer. Don't follow me, I tweet a lot. But you can follow Gulchcast, and I appreciate the questions. They were very, very helpful. And Pete will have this podcast in a couple of days on the Austin Blockchain Collective website. Thanks a lot.
Thank you to Michelle, thank you to a quick pleasant announcement is at the end of today, if you're around, we're having a happy hour at a great little bar down on 6th, Chupacabra. Happy hour prices. I do have some drink tickets for those who want to come along and pander and flatter me, and I might give you one. But it's a good place to go. So that'll happen about 5-ish after we've done here. Gonna get things ready for the next presentation, starting at 11, which is about blockchain for artists and the arts. And I see Karen's here, Jeremy, is Sebastian here? Yeah, he will be, I'm sure. All right, thank you everyone. Excuse me 1 second. Richard, do you have slides for your...
Well, I'm going to give my presentation here, so you'll see it.
I know that, but I meant-
A little late. Huh? Not necessarily.
No.
Yeah.
What's your phone number?
6'3".
Alright, I'll put in text you.
No way
There are some blockchain explorers.
The next panel that's going on, how many people is it going to be, and
A moderator and 2 speakers.
okay, cool, so do you wanna just leave it as the setup right here? Or do you wanna move the table to the side and have all 3 chairs in the front?
What do you wanna do, guys?
Yeah, either way, it doesn't matter to me. I want to stand up when I talk. but-
This is fine, over there, everyone
Okay,
stand up.
perfect, and then I'll grab a few of the waters from the back and set them on the work table for you.
Actually, I can hang in the back.
Alright.
That works, and since these guys are presenting, so.
Yeah, we'll have a work. We don't have microphones or anything to worry about, so,
Okay.
do you have your own slides? Is
I
anyone
do
like-
have my own slides. Did you want me to email them to you, or can I just hook up my computer?
Thanks.
The answer to that is I don't know what's gonna work best.
Oh, I can probably just do this.
Can you airplay?
Antone's?
Yeah.
It'd be funny if I did it to a different room, huh?
Do you wanna use that
No,
one
it
slide I
wouldn't-
have?
Don't do it yet,
Or no?
because I've got my one on, so.
Okay, well, I
but
can
when
do
you-
that then,
yeah.
so, yeah.
Yeah.
It looks like it works really easy.
Right.
Pete, do you want my slide, or just,
Does your slide say anything more than my slide?
I didn't see what you said. Did you?
He said he's in ACL. Oh, okay.
Yes.
Can you turn your AirPlay off?
Oh, sure. Well, I might have to, well, if your stuff's up there.
Yeah, it is now, okay, great.
Yeah.
It wasn't. So that's all my notes, yeah. If you want yours up, that's. If you feel your one is better than my one, so yes, I'll get it up.
Oh, mine just
Right. So you can talk about it, and then we'll just switch to Karen, and then we need to
Okay.
Alright, I'll do like a 1 minute intro to you guys.
Didn't he know where we were? He had all the same information.
That's what I was thinking. Alright. Alright.
How's it going? I'm Jeremy.
Jeremy, Sebastian.
Nice to meet you. Heard a lot of good things.
Oh, thank you.
There you go.
Glad to hear that.
I actually am interested in learning a lot more about what you're doing.
Yeah, we should definitely connect.
Yeah.
Hey,
Hi, Sebastian.
Hi.
Karen.
how are
Nice
you?
meeting you. I'm good.
Good to see you. Good, so you're all here.
Sorry.
What do you need AV wise?
Happy to do AirPlay from my.
All right,
iPad,
great.
My notebook, if that works.
Yeah, that's great, because Karen, Jeremy's going to speak. Karen's going to grab and do AirPlay from hers, and then you can grab and do AirPlay from yours. So you just need to find the Endtones one and
Endtones
the
one?
code. Yeah,
Sure.
it just says Endtones, and then type in the code, and the code comes up on the screen, and you type it in.
Oh, yeah. Very nice.
Great.
Excellent. I'll make sure
Good.
before I close my drive.
Nothing can go wrong. Yeah, that's great.
Famous last words.
Yeah, okay, my dear.
Yes.
You can take whatever you need.
Oh, thank you. I heard you speak about all your different ventures at the Austin blockchain.
Oh, the Awesome Forum?
Collective, the Austin blockchain collective.
Oh, okay,
Meetups
okay.
upstairs.
The meetups, okay.
Yeah.
Great.
But I don't think we got to meet. It was
Yes,
quite
it's
fast that time.
very
I'm actually
interesting.
gonna move this out a little bit.
Jeremy, I think we connected over email, but I don't think we can differ.
I don't think so. Yeah. So we just actually just opened our
I might
office
give you the sketch.
a block away
Oh,
on 805 Brazos.
Yeah,
So,
nice.
yeah.
Thanks.
So you've done with all of your interviews?
Oh, yeah, yeah, we're on overtime now, because we
How
have a
are
little
you
bit of money
selling
left
the-
in the grant. and
You
so
are, is it
I'm
all
going back to LA, well, I'm from LA, I'm going to LA.
Were you doing prints?
And to
Yeah,
Colorado.
mandates, I've got my team. That's what I was told. But I don't have any physical.
But yeah, it's a really good process.
So are you printing on demand? Yeah. You are?
Paint and
Okay.
go through their training, but it's a really.
So we're actually, I'm working with,
good outcome.
I don't know if you know anything about, so I'm trying to talk about it too.
People are actually
But,
interested, really.
yeah, 5 minutes of, so you're an expert on what we do. So, but when we moved into this space, our goal was to really show a working environment of the technology and also support art. And so working with a curator and artist who have not just collections, .io, collections on the block, and so we're doing original pieces, but then I'm also working with a technology provider that I'm advising on
I won it
their
actually.
market
In
theory
a game
conversations
show at IBM, I had to compete with other
print on
partners and
demand
won it with my blockchain.
of authentic prints and then ship and sell them. So we're putting that certificate on the blockchain and then doing tokenization. And then they also are working with workspaces and hotels like WeWork and Hilton areas and all to get the prints up with an interactive AR kind of environment application so that it promotes the sale of the
Excellent.
material. So if you
Proof to everyone here.
definitely interested. Prints and distribution,
Well, that
trying to
turned
see
out
evidence,
nice.
trying to push the
Good.
distribution of it.
Maybe if you tweet it, more people will come.
Yes, this is your.
Hi everyone, so I'm going to get going with this session on blockchain for artists and the arts. Quick question is, who was here for the last session? Not many of you. Okay, I'm going to give you the quick 1 minute commercial on Austin Blockchain Collective. So this is the Startup Week, the blockchain track, which we, the Austin Blockchain Collective, have curated. We're a trade organisation. There are 120 blockchain and crypto companies here in Austin, and we are trying to represent them. And some of them are generous enough to provide us with some funding to allow us to do our jobs. Companies like OneChain, who have been with us from day one. We launched South by Southwest, NEM, who came on last week, 212, who came on today. They came on still today. So thank you to those companies. Thank you to some supporters as well who provide either financial or in-kind help. Much appreciated. Could not do it without everyone. The relevant particulars for the collective, we've got a website, we've got a Twitter, we've got tweet handles. Please go to them and use them. Lots of stuff there. Running lots of events this month. This is Austin Blockchain Month in October. I've got about 10 events I think we're putting on, and most of them are free. A couple of them where you have to pay, we've got big discounts, so check them out. This is day one of Austin Blockchain Month, appropriately. With that, I'm going to hand over to Jeremy to kind of MC the session on blockchain for artists and the arts. We've got two great speakers as well who are sort of deep into this world of and have had great experience of being involved with blockchain and the arts. I'm just going to hand it over to you, Jeremy, to get things going.
Okay, great.
Okay.
So my name is Jeremy Draw, and I'm the founder and CEO of Block512, and about 20 years in the fintech space, and probably about 2.5 years or so in the blockchain-specific space and cryptocurrency. And Block512, we just opened our office about a block up the street, and it's actually a working gallery as well as a technology and collaborative workspace. Really kind of boutique, not like Capital Factory, but working with people that are trying to build blockchain applications out in the market, and we're working with as strategic partners where they're doing AI or data or identity or financial services, and we're trying to pull the pieces together and actually show the space as a working environment of technology. So you always hear about a lot of use cases that are just like big sky, everybody's thinking about it. This is a way for really showing things tangible. And so being involved in the Austin scene for many of the years, we decided that we wanted to be able to take and do something for local Austin artists and bring blockchain as a technology and cryptocurrency as an investment in a payment vehicle. And we created collections on the block, collections.io. So it's an actual working gallery where we're featuring different Austin artists. Every 6 to 8 weeks we'll have different shows and other events going on with it. And then we're also working with technology providers to bring the blockchain applications in. The kind of use cases that you're going to hear today is a good example of it. So it's a collaborative workspace. It's about innovation and tangible look and see and touch and feel technology, so it's not all just out there. It's also being able to offer a new investment and payment vehicle for artists. So if you're investing in, if you were here for the previous session, if you're investing or buying and earning and buying and selling in crypto, you want another vehicle to be able to do it. So being able to give access to artists and be able to buy with your crypto. And then building out the technologies for it. So we actually did a session a couple months ago at the Austin Forum, and Karen and I started to talk about how to bring blockchain home and really show it being tangible. And she has an amazing story that I think really resonates well. Not to mention some really interesting and good things just in general on blockchain. And then Sebastian, entrepreneur and technology providers, really doing some interesting things on the art side, and you start to see how it all kind of comes together as an ecosystem, marketplace, technology, use cases. So I think this is going to be a good session.
Okay, thanks, Jeremy. I'm gonna get my slides up on the screen. So how's everybody doing this morning? Rainy, huh? It's kind of dreary and tired, and I saw people with big coats on last night. I think they just looked out the window and didn't actually go outside, but when they got out there, they were probably pretty surprised. So I'm, as Jeremy mentioned, I'm Karen Kilroy, and my company is Kilroy Blockchain. We've been around since 2016. We're based here in Austin. This is my business partner, Lynn Riley, right here in the front. Some of you may know her. We've been involved in the blockchain meetups a lot around town, and the AI meetups. We were the winner of the IBM Watson Build Challenge in 2017 with our app Riley, which is a smartphone app that uses Watson and explains to people what's around, and it's intended for people who are blind and visually impaired. And we give that away free on app stores if you're interested. But I'm also very involved with the Austin Blockchain Collective. This guy over here, Pete Harris, he seems very quiet and unassuming. He's done a tremendous amount for the blockchain community here, taking it out of the egghead crypto talk to down, not that you're not an egghead, but down to the every person level, where we can all hook on and understand it. And this session is really just a really good example of the way Pete thinks about practical blockchain applications. Now, that's a little bit about me. I'm real curious to know who's here and why you came to this session. First of all, I'd like to know who's brand new to blockchain and really hasn't done much with it. Okay, maybe about half. I'll touch on what blockchain is for you, but if you want to know more, we can always get back together. Now, second, who's in the arts community? Okay, we got a few people in the arts community, and so it's very interesting mix here of folks. Are there people here that are like blockchain experts that consult to people in the arts community besides the folks on the stage? Okay, just wondering. Okay. So what is blockchain? There's lots and lots of talk about blockchain. There's a lot of things that make you think, oh wow, this is really confusing, like, miners in China and all that. Really, when it comes down to the nuts and bolts, it's a database. And each person has a copy. And that helps it keep everybody keep honest. Like if I have one, Lynn might be a participant, she might have a copy of it. and you might have a copy as well. And when something goes on there, it can't go on unless it passes a predetermined criteria, which we've set in what they call a smart contract. And then also too, if Lynn decides late at night, oh man, I wish I hadn't put that on there, and decides to start hacking, she can't, because every record is encrypted based on the previous record. There's a token that's generated that shows the value of the previous record. Yeah. Oh, thanks. Thank you. Okay, so I can get those. Thanks.
Okay.
So, yeah. So that brings me to my story that's happened to me this year. I've had a pretty phenomenal life, but one of the most phenomenal things that I could even imagine happened to me earlier this year. When I was 15 years old, I painted a picture and gave it to David Bowie. I got to meet him. I got to put it in his hand. That was, a really nice thing that happened to me. But the clincher was this May, I was on Twitter and I saw some pictures somebody posted of a show at the Brooklyn Museum. Apparently David Bowie had collected fan art over the years, and his dream was to have an exhibit in a museum of all the fan art. And lo and behold, there was my picture right there on Twitter. I about fell over. He saved my picture for 38 years into his death. And then, 2 more after. 40 years later, I saw this picture. So, now, fortunately, I had signed it. Smart little girl. I signed the front of it, put my name on it. And so there was no question about whose picture it was. I have not a super common name, Karen Kilroy. So, they're like, okay, yeah, we believe you. But what if this was actually worth a lot of money now, which it might be, because everything David Bowie owned is worth a lot of money. And what if there was a dispute over who the artist was? Well, I would just really be, be like, okay, well, what was your writing like when you were 13 years old, 14 years old, So I wouldn't really have much of a leg to stand on. But what if they had had blockchain back then? And what if my high school teacher was able to take what we call a crypto anchor, which is a little sample of the artwork, or even like a QR code, or maybe some little dots we painted on that you could only see with a microscopic camera. And what if that blockchain went to the Junior High Artwork Blockchain Association and it stayed there forever? And maybe I had a copy on my floppy disk, on my 7-inch floppy disk. So, and then that way I would be able to plug back in later and say, look, this is mine. And maybe even on that lineage might be that David Bowie owned it. So that just gives, of course, there was no such thing in 1978, but now in 2018, there's a lot we can do, and those types of things can live in the cloud, right? So you don't have to have it on a 7-inch floppy to show people. You can go up to your cloud account and pull your truth down. And what it is it's just like a ledger. It's like a ledger that says, okay, Karen painted this on this day. Art teacher certified it. Here's the crypto anchor. David Bowie accepted it on this day. Boom, boom, and put the proof in. So it's just like a trail of proof. Now I have this little fun guy up here. Does anybody know what that is? CryptoKitty, that's right. And who said that? Very good. Now, CryptoKitty, oddly enough, this little weird cartoon is an example of collectible artwork that's generated as a digital asset. And there's a $10 word, fungible or non-fungible. And there's 2 types of assets that they have with blockchain. And a fungible asset would be like, okay, I'm going to go to the store and I'm going to pay Lynn $5 for this fruit that I'm buying, right? Okay, so it's $5 US. That's a fungible asset. But if I go in with my Johnny Mathis trading card from from 1979 and say, Lynn, this is worth more than the money that I owe you for that fruit, she's going to tell me to get back, right? So, so that's an example of something that has value but not to everybody, and that's called a non-fungible asset. Okay, so, and these assets, like the CryptoKitties, they can be bought and sold with regular currencies or with cryptocurrencies, so don't let that part confuse you. Okay, some other uses for blockchain. Because it's a permanent trail, one of the things that you can do is solve one of the big problems in the art world with how do I store this, how do I ship this, how do I display this. There's very intricate, and people in the art world would probably know more about this than I do, but when an artist creates something, it's not always just hammer a nail in the wall and throw it up there. It's sometimes, okay, this piece has to sit at this angle to this piece, and if you ship it, you gotta make sure you disassemble this. There's gonna be instructions, and blockchain can help those instructions follow the artwork. And then also too, as I mentioned, you can have a crypto anchor that physically connects the actual asset. Some other things that you can track on blockchain is, was this painting damaged? Was it repaired? Was it ever evaluated? Was insurance ever paid out on it? All those things can become part of the trail. And then when you have someone that comes to buy it, they say, okay, let me see what we have here. Instead of having to hire an expert to find out if it's a real Riley, now it could be a fake Riley painting, you know, because that's like the oldest trick in the book, right? Like fake paintings. How long has that been haunting the collectibles world? Like, it's forever. So this is something that can really help vet out the fakes. I might not be able to find a Riley painting expert readily here in Austin. I might have to go to Paris or something, but I could look back at the blockchain to see when the last time was that someone verified that painting, how they did it, what documentation they used, and what value they thought it had. So now it comes down to the buyer. The buyer might be looking at the art online. They might only be looking at a picture of the artwork. Maybe that artwork's gonna stay in a museum, and they'll only own the digital asset, and they'll never actually have that artwork in their house. That's another possibility. Or maybe that artwork doesn't even exist as a real physical piece. Maybe it's like a CryptoKitty, and it only exists as a digital piece. So there's just all kinds of different ways that this is being taken. So just to wrap up, with blockchain, it's authentic and traceable. And you can put all kinds of metadata into the actual blockchain about that object. And it's interesting today, kind of related, Google announced that they're putting for photos, they're putting the photo credits as part of the metadata of every photo on Google. So now you can go mouse over it and click whatever, and it tells you who the photo credits are. I think that's probably a predecessor to now you can verify it on blockchain. I think that's probably the way they're heading. But all kinds of the data around that asset can be stored and retrieved. You can have physical assets or digital assets, as well as an expanded marketplace. Reach a lot farther to help artists actually make more money and create more value from their art. So that's what I had. Thank you very much. Do you want to do questions now, Pete, or at the end, or does anybody have any questions? Oh, here's my contact info. I'm sorry. Question?
I was just wondering, can you speak a little bit about the security of like the crypto anchor? Like, isn't it replicatable, or what is?
You can make them unique. You can make them. A crypto anchor can really be anything that you can digitize. So it could be a QR code, that type of thing, or it could just be some type of a pattern that's on the artwork somewhere, as long as it's recorded and it matches up again. That would be the whole point, is trying to match it with itself. Yeah.
What type of cryptography are you using?
What kind of cryptography?
Yeah.
Any could be used. Like, were you talking about public-private key, or?
Yeah, because it seems like if these are used for high-end art pieces, you know, that's a lot of money.
Yeah.
Crypto could be hacked.
Well, generally with the blockchain stuff, it may be a private blockchain as opposed to a public blockchain. Like, it can do it either way. So the security is an important consideration, but it's something that would be, it's a factor that would be brought in during the architecture phase. Like right now, we keep getting companies to ask us to do art type blockchain all over the world. And they each have different requirements for security.
Cool, okay.
Yeah.
It's like per site kind of deal.
Yeah, yep. Depends on what they're trying to do. Yeah.
Yeah, how is it applied in the music? It's just for tracking the tracks or like a new way of payments for the artists?
You know, that's really up to someone's imagination at this point because no one's running with it yet. But I know Spotify bought out Media Chain a few years ago, and I don't know what's happened with that one. But the rumor was that Spotify had no control over artists. Like, I've had music up for years I've never seen a dime, and I've heard way bigger artists than me say, gosh, you know, I should be getting $500,000 and I'm not seeing it. So, like, somewhere is all that money. And it was my understanding that Spotify bought Media Chain to try to solve that, but they kind of took them away from everybody else. And what Media Chain was doing was trying to make it so artists' royalties were all tracked and in use. When you play it, it was tracked on blockchain, all that.
In the music industry, you could look at it as a kind of a licensing and all the way through everybody that contributes to the creation and the production and the distribution. And then you can also look at it as the licensing and the royalties and the payments of the sale all the way then back through the supply chain. So blockchain in a lot of different applications, that's not one use case, there's a lot of use cases that go into that. But you're able to, that's the promise of it. The downside is there's a lot of people in the industry that you have to penetrate to be able to to crack that as a marketplace.
I think there's room for disruption. You know, there's room for more ideas.
And I think that decentralization is kind of the keyword there in terms of what Karen was mentioning about where the money is, right? When you decentralize that payment mechanism and flow, then it becomes more transparent. So it's a lot harder to gain the money, right?
I think it's your turn, Sebastian.
All right.
Thank you, everybody. Thank you for all the good questions, too. And I will be around afterwards if you want to talk about anything.
Oops. Not the right. I think it's going to be the wrong combination. This is PowerPoint. Sorry, I'm more of a keynote guy. Alright. So, I brought a couple of things, so before I get started, I wanted to pass this guys around. So much time on that. So pass it around. See it? Alright. And if you can help me pass this around and keep one. Hello everyone, my name is Sebastian Brocher. Thank you for being here today. This is really exciting. Sharing this panel with this sharp minds in the blockchain and having you all here. I'm a technology executive and entrepreneur, but I'm here today to talk about crypto arte, which is a lot more fun than most of what I do otherwise. So really excited again to be here. So let's get started. My presentation will have a little bit of art and a little bit of tech. Crypto art is one of those multidisciplinary projects that blends both things together. And so just as a way for me to tailor my speech a little bit, who's here more interested about the art? If you can raise your hand versus the tech, okay? a lot of art, and who's more interested about tech than art? All right, so about half and half, which that's an easy split for me to do. But you know, we'll have questions as well, so we can go deeper into any of the areas later as well. So as I said, crypto art is a little bit of a mix of art and tech, right? So they would like to divide that so it becomes a little more approachable. I'm going to talk about generative art. That's the kind of art that I use for this project. And then about non-fungible tokens, which Karen already kind of mentioned, so we'll go a little deeper into that. So it was great that I'm following you, Karen, because I have a perfect intro to get into that collectible and digital assets kind of world. And then I'm going to talk a little bit about decentralized applications and what those are. And I should qualify that most of the times when I'm speaking about blockchain, I'm talking about Ethereum specifically, although some of the things I'm going to mention apply to other blockchains as well. One of the uniqueness of the project's unique part of projects is that I'm using blockchain and Ethereum both as a way to generate the art. So I'm using Ethereum blockchain public information to generate the art, and then I'm turning it around and then putting that art back into the blockchain, right? So it's an interesting kind of full circle meta part of the project, and hopefully that'll become clearer as we go. But I'll get started with generative art. So the idea of generative art is that as an artist, you take a step back, and instead of generating the art yourself and drawing it, which I can't, like Karen and other more artistic, gifted individuals, you generate what's called an autonomous system, right? So I take a step back as the artist and like generate a system instead that reacts to the environment or input data or random data, and it generates art of some kind. In my case, that's visual art, but it could very well be sound. It could very well be a sculpture that is being built by a 3D printer, and it could very well be a combination of all these types of art. So that's kind of the general idea on how generative art works. Now, in my specific case, you can bring it a step closer. I would change that artist word to the algorithm word, which is the idea of it's an algorithm. It is someone that generates an algorithm that generates art, or vice versa, how you think about it. But that's kind of the key word of what I do in this project, right? And the input data on the environment, in my case, is coming from the public information that's stored in the Ethereum blockchain. So as Karen was mentioning, this is basically a decentralized database that's cryptographically secure or tamper-proof, so it's immutable once the data gets into the blockchain. And essentially, these blocks are combining together sets of transactions, right? And so you have all this publicly available information on the blockchain. So that's my input data, or the environment in my case. And I built that algorithm that basically builds the crypto art collection. I call it a collection because it's a set of 9,895 paintings, each of them unique, and each of them projecting 576 consecutive blocks of the Ethereum blockchain. So painting 0 goes from block 0, or the genesis block of the Ethereum blockchain, to block 575. Painting 1 goes from 576 to 1151. The math is correct. And so on and so on, right? And so it creates this intimate relationship between history and time and a given painting, which in turn a lot of the folks that end up buying these paintings have a meaning for. That's my case with this background picture, or painting. Yeah, thanks. So that painting is about the time where our dog, Tobik, was born. It's about 2 years and a half, or 2 years and something old. So fairly new in the Ethereum blockchain. You can see the first block here, maybe it's a little rough to see from there, but the number in the bottom, it's 165,312. That's the block number for that first block on that painting. So if you divide that by 576, you'll get the painting number within the collection. And the last block also has the block number, which should be the plus 576, right? Minus 1. And the top number is the timestamp. So that's a little bit geeky maybe, but it's the number of seconds since 1970, January 1st, Meridian time, right, or UTC, right? So that's a stamp in the blockchain as well, and that gives you also that idea of like, hey, this painting represents that period of time. For Ethereum, most of the times that's about 2.5 to 3 hours, and that depends on how the network is mining new blocks. Yeah, so you'll see that different paintings will look a little bit different. This one also has a special meaning for me. This is, I think, the one that is being passed around, and this is my wedding. This is the time where I got legally wed to my wife Anna, and so you can see how these paintings have a special meaning for me, and so I decided to keep them instead of selling them, and so different collectors are interested on different paintings. A little bit more of what's going on also, because it'll make a little more sense later, but I want to cover that now. You'll see a shape or icon inside each of the blocks. That represents the miner. So every miner, which Karen explained a little bit about, is the one kind of doing that heavy lifting to cryptographically secure that block, and then the rest of the network will validate that or not. But once it becomes on the blockchain, then it becomes immutable, right? So that miner did a lot of work to get that block into the blockchain. The icon or the shape represents each unique miner. So as the paintings progress over the collection, you'll see the same miner mining different blocks, and that's what you can see here with this icon repeating itself. That means the same miner mined those 3 blocks. So because the algorithm itself is deterministic, it's kind of a fancy word to say like, hey, given the same input, you'll get always the same output. And because it's always the same algorithm transforming those blocks of 576 blocks, then the collection tells the story of the Ethereum blockchain. And that's one of the meanings of the project, is like, hey, here's how the Ethereum blockchain evolved. Yeah, I'll skip a little further. In the corners, you'll see these triangles with different colors. Those are actually derived from the hash that Karen explained before. That's part of how the blockchain gains that immutability, and the chain part of the block, as the blocks point to each other, forming that chain over time. This is when my son Lucas was born, so it's again another painting that matters to me. And yeah. Just got one more. Yeah, got a little thing. Yeah, and this is when my son Adam was born. He's about 6 months and a half old, so this is a lot more recent. You can see how the colors have changed a lot. The background colors have a very specific meaning, which I'm not quite ready to tell yet. Part of the idea of this project is let people kind of figure out if they can reverse engineer some of the meaning of the paintings. So there's this game kind of played between I, the algorist, and the audience. Hopefully you guys can guess some of that, but I won't comment more. So yeah, so Pete asked me to put on my slides, how did this project happen? And I thought about that for a while, and I had this superficial answer of like, well, hey, I wanted to learn about blockchain. I wanted to have like a live mainnet project that's out there, learn about the different tech stack, and learn about non-fungible tokens, and do a fun kind of side project with it. That's kind of the superficial answer. If I dig a little bit more, there's a deeper answer, which is it's just a combination of experiences of our life. So my mom was into computer science before computer science was a thing. She graduated as a calculista científico and had some crazy geometría descriptiva and geometría analytical books that had all these spheres and shapes and ellipses and circles and rectangles and lines and things like that. So I played with that as a kid. She had punch cards around the house, which kind of looked like the crypto arte. We have like this structure of encoding something, which ultimately is what visual art is about. We're encoding that message in one way or the other, and that's not that different from how computer language works, right? So as a kid, my dad brought a Commodore to the house, and we programmed together a little program, basic program to play Bach Invention, right? And I went to conservatory for 5 years. And so all these things kind of somehow came together, and I think that's a real reason why this project came to life. Another influential project is the 1,000 Paintings experiment, which some of you may have heard. It's probably about 10 years old or so, where the artist basically did a collection of 1,000 paintings numbered from 0 to 999. It was more of an experiment about digital and viral marketing, but nonetheless inspired the idea, or probably the structure of like, hey, I'm gonna have a collection of numbered paintings, each of them being unique in their own way. So the mission kind of in between my crazy childhood, geeky things, and maybe more of the surface level answer, there's somewhere the mission of CryptoArty, what I really want to accomplish with it. The idea is to foster awareness. Ethereum and blockchain in general, like Karen said, can be a little bit intimidating at first to grasp, especially if you don't come from an engineering world. It can be a little bit hard to understand. And so the idea is, through using these paintings, hopefully they'll provoke initial conversations and thoughtful conversations where, hey, you may have this painting in a room and somebody will ask about it, and then like, hey, this is how the blockchain works, right? Like there's blocks, there's miners, there's hash, and they change over time, and so on and so on, right? So, and also make it fun and accessible to newcomers. And I'll touch more upon that later. Yeah, so that was up to now was kind of the art part of the talk. A little bit kind of the fun story behind the talk. Now we're kind of shifting gears towards the tech. And so like Karen said, there's this world of non-fungible tokens, right? And the idea of a non-fungible token being a token where each of the tokens is unique, and the value of that token is may well be different from the value of the other token, right? So when you think about a more traditional ERC20 type token, all the tokens have the same value, right? And so smart contracts, or the technology that powers them, typically is just to store how much you own of them, because owning 10 tokens is enough to know. There's no difference between which 10 tokens you own. It's just a matter of like you own 10 tokens, right? With non-fungible tokens, it's the other way around. So the technology underneath the smart contract that manages the tokens for CryptoArty actually tracks every individual painting and who owns that that painting, right? So for us, the way we implement that non-fungible token standard is we assign each token to a unique painting. So there's an internal kind of index of that token that goes from 0 to how many tokens I have minted. I haven't minted the whole collection, but I minted some part. And within that, we associate that to a painting number, right? So that's a token ID in our case. And then the smart contract that implements that non-fungible token standard, or the CryptoArty smart contract, keeps track of who owns each of those tokens, right? So Karen was talking about authenticity and provenance. There's ownership as well, right? All these things are important to art, and tracking them more closely increases the value, right? It's better for artists, it's better for collectors, it's better for everyone that is not trying to skim apart in the middle, right, of those two. And so the contract tracks ownership, right? So we have here the owners. Obviously, somebody can own multiple paintings, right? The opposite is not true. We only sell a painting once, and the smart contract enforces that any given painting can only be associated to one owner at any given time. But it does track provenance over time through using Ethereum events. So you actually also get that record of who owned the painting over time. So if David Bowie owned the painting and that increases the value, hey, you can see that on the blockchain as well. And not only that, not only you can see it, it's also immutable, so nobody can try to mess with it or try to forge that, right? So we have ownership, and we have the provenance, the tracking of that ownership over time. The other element Karen mentioned is authenticity, right? So how do we know if a painting is really authentic, right? Well, in my case, what I did with CryptoArty is I extended just a little bit the non-fungible token standard by adding these hashes here. And what hash is probably a very technical word, but it's basically a digital signature. So given a painting, all the paintings are unique. Each painting will have a unique digital signature. And I store that digital signature of that painting that's calculated from the full resolution digital image of that painting on the blockchain as well. And that is associated to that painting. So if you own a crypto art painting, that means basically that you have access to the private keys of the wallet or the address that owns that painting. The smart contract will track that address in fact owns that painting, but it also has the digital signature of the painting. And as the owner, you can actually, we'll cover this in a second, you can actually also get that full digital image. And you can recalculate that digital signature. And not just you, but anyone that has that file can recalculate that digital signature. So basically, that lets us do authenticity in a decentralized way, meaning there's no need to trust any single party of the fact of whether or not that painting is authentic. Anyone can validate that authenticity on their own, comparing the digital signature with what's stored on the blockchain, which is, again, decentralized and tamper-proof. So going a little bit deeper on the tech, just a little tiny bit, the standard that covers non-fungible tokens is 721. It establishes basically different functions or methods that you can interact with that smart contract with, right? And those are available to anyone. You can execute them on your own. Another contract on the network can execute them as well. You can use them through a decentralized app or DApp, as we'll see in a second. Or you can actually use them directly from your wallet. It's a little bit more difficult, but it can be done. You can also use them through Etherscan.
Yeah, will these ECR 721 tokens show up in a regular Ethereum address, or is there a different type of Ethereum address than the ECR 20 tokens?
Yeah, good question. So we'll take questions later, but I want to answer very quickly, and then we can go deeper into that. There's the address of the contract itself. The contract itself has the array or index of each token associated to the owner, right? So the address of a painting lives as an index inside an array inside the smart contract. It doesn't have an Ethereum address per se. It has something inside the contract. The code for the contract is publicly available and verified on Etherscan, though, so you can actually know what's going on. Hopefully it's satisfying answer.
We'll have to go over that. Same address. Same address. Okay.
Yeah, so as you can see, this gets maybe a little too technical, but I wanted to kind of touch upon so you get an idea of what really means a non-fungible token or an ERC 721 standard. You have things that are defined of like balance of how many tokens does an owner have, or owner of. So you have the token ID, and you can ask the contract who owns this painting. You can also transfer tokens. So this, in essence, provides a way to resell and buy the painting. So in our case, for instance, we integrate with OpenSea, which is an open marketplace, Y Combinator company that lets you auction any non-fungible token that's within their available collections. We are one of them. And so you can, if you buy a crypto art painting from us, you can then 3 years later resell it on OpenSea, and there's nothing I can do about it. The contract lets you do that because I intentionally wanted that to be the case. You have full ownership of that painting. You can sell it. I'm not going to take any commission. There's other ways, obviously, business models that you can follow. Mine was like, hey, you have full ownership of it. You can get your digital image. You can validate authenticity. You can resell it or whatever you want. There's also stipulations for letting third parties sell on your behalf as an owner. So I can authorize, for instance, OpenSea to sell paintings that I own, and that's how the whole marketplaces around NFTs work. It's by granting those third parties the ability to sell on behalf of owners. So that's about NFTs. Going into the decentralized application, that's what you face when you go to cryptoarte.io, right? So our website. Our website lets you do a bunch of different things. You can browse the entire collection, so you can see all the paintings in the collection. You cannot get the full digital image of those paintings, but you can see low resolution images and then high resolution samples of the paintings. You can purchase the paintings with Ether and with credit card, and the credit card part is kind of the fun part here. That's my way to try and realize that objective of making it easier for folks to get on Ethereum. And so the idea of how that works basically is like, yeah, I want to make it easy for folks to buy paintings and get on Ethereum, but I also want to respect the idea of like, hey, they have a token, right? So what I do is I will create a wallet on your behalf. I'll mint and send the token to that wallet, and then I'll give you the mnemonic or seed phrase for that wallet and ship it in a secure envelope together with your painting. So 10 years later, you can still resell it and you own that token and everybody can validate that you do. And you can order design frame prints. You can get the hash or the digital signatures for paintings to validate authenticity. And it works with MetaMask. That's the most common use case. Like if you have the MetaMask plugin installed on your browser, then you can access all the Ethereum-based interaction. And also with mobile wallets like Coinbase Wallet, Trust Wallet, and so on. So, quick idea on how the technology layer works for that. As you think about the Ethereum network, being on the bottom, we have then two different smart contracts. One that deals with the tokens themselves, so the non-fungible tokens, and then another contract that actually sells the paintings. And we dig into more in that a little more if you like. The Infura layer is basically a third-party service that we use so that we don't have to run full Ethereum nodes to interact with the network. It's a compromise solution. It sacrifices a little bit of decentralization in exchange for a lot of convenience and easier developer time, right? On top of that, there's a decentralized application from CryptoArde, and it's API that holds metadata. Karen talked about metadata. Nowadays, what happens is like you have a decision as an engineer, as a builder of a dApp, of what you put on-chain and what you put off-chain. That typically is how you come with what metadata you store on-chain versus what metadata you give over an API or stored in some other data store. That's kind of a decision that's unique to each project. For me, the digital signatures, for instance, are something that's very important, and so those are on the blockchain. Other metadata about the image, just like the description of a painting, is not as important, and so it's less expensive to have those at a more traditional data store. And the API is what gives access to that. Yeah, so that's it from me. Hopefully you enjoyed the chat. One quick comment about the handouts. That's a crypto art puzzle for you. If you solve that, the left side is a clue, the right side is a puzzle. If you solve that, I'll give you 12 words. Those 12 words are a mnemonic for a wallet that contains a crypto art painting. So it's a free painting, but you'll have to use one of the methods from there to transfer it out of that wallet, because otherwise somebody else can. It's a fun game.
So we'll open it up, but I think from a summary, we talked about how the technology can be used to show the authentic original pieces and tracking through time and transactions and history. And then actually as an artist and a more unique way of actually creating the art itself through the technology, but also showing the technology. There's a lot of, it's not massively being promoted yet, but there's a fair amount of different so if you're looking at it from an artist perspective, companies that are doing things on blockchain for artists and creatives that you can tap into, and in Austin particularly, as you can see, and with the gallery collections. And then just if you're in the technology itself, I'd say there's a tremendous opportunity to be creative and come up with applications. I think there's a big demand and a market for it. Any questions?
What happens if somebody buys a painting and then gives it to somebody in their family or passes away and it gets passed down through generations, and their child gets the painting or their nephew gets the painting and they didn't realize that it was purchased via this crypto pattern, and they try to resell it on your crypto pattern without having that transactional record from the dad to the daughter or the dad to the son or whatever that is, and they try to resell it. What happens by the way, this painting was already on our system, we expect it to be owned by this person. Can you talk a little bit through about like what happens when people stop using have transactions outside of your network and then try to come back in?
Yeah, absolutely, great question. So what happens is you end up with like Karen, right? Then you end up having to prove, provenance, authenticity without crypto, right? So theoretically, I guess you could argue that, Karen, you're welcome to join us here, but you could argue that the value will go down because then you don't have that proof, right? Then the kind of chain of ownership or provenance record was lost, right? So from a system perspective or a technology perspective, the CryptoArte smart contract will still have the record of who that last owner on the blockchain is and think that that's the true owner of that painting, right? And that wallet, by the way, will still be able to download the full digital image through the DApp. Now, the new owner may or may not know. Your hope is that they would know that, hey, this looks like a CryptoArte painting, so I should get a token with it. And so that again comes to that idea of like value and provenance, right? Like, obviously, yes, you can grab this from me today, and if we don't complete that transaction through the smart contract, then the smart contract will still think that I own the painting, but you may have a physical copy of it. Right?
Did you contact the museum or the gallery where?
Oh, yeah.
And how was that exercise? Did they?
Well, the painting belongs to David Bowie's family, so I haven't heard anything more than that. But they did like an article about it and stuff that his family did. DavidBowie.com.
Yeah. So one of the things we're seeing is that if you look at an artist that's producing original pieces, there's a way for them to try to get, by putting it on here, you drive additional value, authenticity, et cetera, for it. And then if you're going to do original and generic, authentic prints out there, then you also want to have some limited edition and tracking in that through the certificates and blockchain. And also that if you get exposure in it, it helps drive your original pieces up in exposure. And blockchain is a way to be able to facilitate across the whole life cycle of it. And then if you look at the art itself, not only do you have the artist, you have the piece as an asset and a life it takes and different owners it has. So by being able to pull all of this together into a cohesive story and a life, you can incrementally drive additional value and protect it over the course of time.
Yeah, I agree. I mean, that's the oldest thing in the world. Artists end up not making any money, and artists get their work copied, and they get the value of their work diluted by copies, and I really think this solves a lot of problems. And surprisingly enough, there's been a lot of interest that I've been hearing from galleries and such. You had a question?
Yeah, you still have the bad actor problem, right?
Mm-hmm.
Someone buys a piece of art, they're a bad actor, they duplicate that art, they have the hash and the private key, then they have someone else create another piece that's the same, and then they sell the other piece that's the same
to
the world. So there's still that same dilemma.
Do you want to comment on that?
Well, again, that's something that would have to be thought out and architected when the actual application is made. It could be that they would have a very hard time getting the public key, the private key, and the hash.
But I purchased the art. Let's say I'm the bad actor, which I'm not. I purchased the art. I now have the private key. Then you go out and make that art as a duplicate. You hire someone that's a professional artist. Now, I transfer that art. I have the original.
Mm-hmm.
But that art that's now circulating in the real world is the fake.
But that duplicate's going to be slightly different than the original, and so it's going to create a different hash.
And I think that's where you put some anchors, and there's some other unique things. So it's not the technology in itself, it's going to be a combination of things. How do you create a fingerprint associated with that, unique attributes, crypto anchors? There's some other ways. So it's not just blockchain as a single solution to solve it. It is part of a bigger component that takes additional elements.
Go ahead.
Yeah, and for instance, for art that's really valuable, what Jeremy's saying, and it's actually, there's other technologies that you can combine if you wanted to. Like, so crystal dust is like one that's used for like really valuable fine art, right? That's gonna be almost impossible to duplicate. It's also expensive, right? So you have different compromises and different tech that you can mix and match. In my case, I obviously know about that problem, and it's almost intentional that, hey, you own it, you can actually order direct from me all the prints you want. Do whatever you want with it. The blockchain knows that address owns that, and then if you decide to sell 10,000 copies of it, that's how you as an owner of that painting decide to treat the value of your, and what you decide to, it's yours, it's not mine, it's yours. Right? So I don't even have a problem with it, which is maybe an easier solution, right?
Well, I mean, on the prints, I think there's probably more of the issue, right? Because the prints are gonna be pretty similar. They're prints versus an original piece, which is gonna be much harder to duplicate.
Right.
100%.
Also, too, crypto anchors can be microscopic. That's another thing. Something could be imprinted that's just so small that no one would even know where to look. That's another way you can do it.
Even on diamonds, they're not even taking the cut anymore. They're putting nanotechnology in because of how you can change and do things. So it's a combination of technology, different applications to be able to protect whatever the asset may be.
We had a question or a comment in the back, the glasses.
Yeah.
You've had your hand up for a while, I'm sorry.
That's all right. So during your presentation, I was kind of thinking of the crypto pets kind of thing, where there's these digital, avatars or what have you that are on a blockchain, so you know that they're authentic and you can collect them. It seems like this is kind of that for like the adult version of that. I was wondering if you see the parallel as well, and it seems also with the non-fungible currency piece of this, that you're trying to find a way to track other measures of value that are not numerical, that are maybe less not as easy to assess just with a number, right? Which is where art kind of is, right? So there are these other elements that you identified, right? Like who's owned it, when was it made, so on and so forth, that seem to be part of what collectors and people who assess the values of these things look at, that you've kind of taken care of as a way to eventually translate that into a dollar amount. Is that kind of where this is going? Or?
Yeah.
Okay.
Great questions. So first part is this the adult version of some other CryptoPet type project? And second is how does, I guess the way I would rephrase it would be, are we leveraging blockchain tech and tech in general as a way to bring more value to art, right? So on the first one, it's hard to comment from my perspective, right? You guys be a better judge of that than myself, but a little bit. I mean, the gaming industry is no joke, so I don't think calling other crypto pets type projects, something for kids, it's accurate, right? But it's still a game, right? So different folks will appreciate differently. The industry per se, it's really interesting, and I think gaming and blockchain belong together, and it's a great space to go into. From my perspective, I've never been a big gamer, but I've been a lot more into art. Even if art is not my pedigree, is not what I do professionally every day. but I had that interest of like, hey, how can I apply blockchain to art?
I guess I was
Right.
I was meaning in term more less in terms of gaming and more in terms of like a thought experiment of what is possible with blockchain.
Right, yeah, and that opens up a huge realm of possibilities, right? Like you can think about, hey, how can I use NFTs for real estate, right? How can I use NFTs for supply chain, right? And they have applications across the board where you're thinking like authenticity and provenance in art. There's keywords that match those, ownership, authenticity, provenance, tracking. That applies to so many other industries, right? And that was really my interest from a technology perspective. It's like, hey, let me do something fun that I can have fun with and like not take it super seriously. I want to learn the stack, I want to learn the technology. But then that opens up, it's like, hey, there's many applications, and art per se it's a fairly large industry. I think, Jeremy, you know better than me, probably about 50 billion a year. So it's also no joke. Yeah, I think it's about 50 billion a year, right? So if you think about, I think food industry is about 5 trillion a year. It's still relatively small when compared to other industries, but it's no joke either, right? So obviously, the implications for art are significant, and that's kind of your second part of the question, right? Like how does this add value to art, right? And I think yes. I think the answer is
Definitely
it's
adds value. And I'll just also throw out there that, if you have an idea that you think might change an industry, you might be onto something, because right now it's all kind of up in the air. This whole thing with an asset being something digital that goes on blockchain, it's all new. And just about any type of industry, you can think of ways to do it that nobody's doing already.
Yeah, and I was just gonna say, if you are an artist in Austin and you want to talk about potentially doing a showing or selling your prints or something, I'm open to it. And if you're from a technology and supply chain, Karen, I think you would be open to having, that's Kilroy does, and if you're a technology provider and you're looking for partners and other things, I think we're all open to having that dialogue.
Yeah, absolutely.
Do we still have time for questions? We've still got hands.
We've got another 15 minutes if you
Oh,
like.
okay.
When it comes to some of the technologies you guys have been building out, it looks like you were using Ethereum. I know there's like Hyperledger. There's a lot of different types of blockchains. How would you guys recommend go about selecting a specific type of blockchain to build a technology on, and what are some things you guys look into when it maybe comes to partnerships with the dev team? Because I'm not a blockchain developer. Can you sort of talk to, like, if you're going to try to build this out or build something out like this for artists, what type of, how would you think about going about that?
I could take that one. Just like any tech project, you want to start with gathering detailed requirements and look at the requirements of the whole thing, and then choose which flavor of blockchain you would want based on the requirements of the project overall. And also, to the other thing you'd want to look at is what systems it'll integrate with, and what kind of integration they want to have. When you're analyzing a blockchain use case, a standard way to do it is to figure out who are my participants, what are my assets, and what are the transactions that they'll perform. And depending on different requirements, like security requirements, whether you need an asset, or whether you're just doing some type of whether you need like a non-fungible asset, or whether you're just doing a tracking project to create an audit trail. Those types of factors, you evaluate all that. And then you want to get familiar with the different flavors of Hyperledger, with Ethereum. So that's my advice on how you start.
I would say the same. Really define the use case and narrow it down, and then go and start to look at the different protocols. There's a lot of protocols that are out there. If depending on what you want it to be, if it's going to be transactional and payment oriented, if it's going to be identity and smart contracts, so it depends on what you're looking to do. But it's good to just start.
And then there's also, you know, shortcuts you can take, like like there's the Hyperledger Composer, which is a tool that does a lot of the chain code, and you don't have to learn chain code before you can start playing with stuff and prototyping it. So there's a lot of different, and you know, like if it's a quick proof of concept, you might wanna do something like that. If it's something where they're actually planning on rolling to production, you might wanna do something that's gonna have more staying power.
Anybody else?
Do you think it opens up the potential for royalties for artists? On the print and digital side, there hasn't really been an opportunity for that, but since the new opportunities arise around being able to take 1% of secondary sales becomes a real opportunity.
That's what we're doing. Yeah, so we're working with that. So we're having the original art in the gallery, and then our partner we're working with is taking an existing platform as a marketplace, putting original prints and kind of a VR, AR, digital media perspective, and they're working with high traffic areas like co-working spaces and resorts and others to put the print with a QR, an anchor to pull in, get the information, be able to buy it. And so it gives a whole marketplace an opportunity for artists to be able to drive higher demand and visibility for who they are, and then their originals go higher, et cetera. Or the intent, anyway.
Theoretically, yes. But if there's a way to rip off the artist, someone will figure it out.
Well, that's part of the beauty, right? The transparency that comes from decentralized mechanisms. If you publish and verify the smart contract codes, then it's like, hey, here's a machine that we trust, and then there's the code, right? And then theoretically it opens up that possibility.
Yeah.
Yes.
But I would say it's never going to solve 100% of the problems. It's all about evolution and opportunity for expansion in new markets.
Do you envision, like, let's say you have a piece of art, and you know the artist, like going back to that artist and saying, hey, can you put on like a QR code or something else like that, so that way I can verify that piece of art later on?
Well, that was kind of the question I was thinking with the David Bowie. Would they be open to you putting some kind of retrofit and put an anchor so that you can extend the solution in the scenario that you had? I think I love that story. I think it's one of the most awesome stories.
It probably has my home address and my phone number on the back of it.
But I don't see why you couldn't, right? I mean, if you're building a market and you're doing it, again, it's not going to solve all of it, but being able to go back and put that on a platform depends on how you would design it and say, yeah, this is how you would be the anchor.
Yeah. And there's a lot of platforms that are coming up, right? Like almost every question from the last 3-4, there's like at least one platform that I can think of, and Jeremy's one is obviously. There's Codex Protocol. I think it's attacking the problem you mentioned, right? There's Known Origin. That's letting artists themselves upload their digital paintings, and they'll do the tokenization for you, so the artist doesn't really need to know that much about blockchain. But you could do.
What was the name of that again?
Known Origin, I think it's called.
Yeah, and I know Codex. There's a handful, and there's others that are helping to do fractional ownership and investments. So that's why I was saying, if you think about what you might want to be trying to solve or need, do a little research. You probably would find there's a fair amount that are there, and I think that at least from my perspective, I'm not an art expert at all. This is purely out of a kind of a passion, but I think that most of the platforms are really focusing on not being technical. So really looking at how they can help the industry and the artist be more successful and focused on being creative. Unless you're banging out code and creating blocks.
Lady in the red dress had a question. Do you still have your question?
Yeah, I was wondering if the anchor has to be a visual one, or could it be an audio one too?
Can it be an audio anchor? That's really interesting. Yeah, it could. It could be anything that can be digitized.
And they do make
if there's
audio
some way
watermarks.
to connect that in with the artwork. You know, the point of a printed anchor is you could actually print it in the ink, or print it, in embedded in painting or whatever, but audio anchor is interesting too.
And I don't know if the audio, the watermarks, the audio, because like if you think of Shazam, that's a watermark that they use for it. I don't know if you can do a unique one versus, like how you would lock it down to just being one.
Yeah, I'm not sure. If you had a piece of artwork that made a sound, you know, you could perhaps record that unique sound and have that be the anchor. And if this doesn't match up, then someone has faked the art piece. So, you know.
And there's also invisible versions of anchors, right? Like I spoke the other day with a gentleman that has an app that lets you scan kind of from 3D on very specific angles something that's a physical object, but I'll be able to recognize using AI like very specific patterns of the materials on different lights, and kind of abstract out of like that object unique properties that can create a digital signature of that object without even putting anything on it.
Did you just say magenta?
No, sorry.
Okay.
Didn't mean to.
No, you're talking about with the microscopic.
Actually, it's an app, right?
Yeah.
So by scanning the same physical object on from different angles and on different lights, the app uses AI to kind of extract very specific properties of that object. That would be very, very, very hard to replicate unless you had that original, real physical object. So it's a different type of anchor, right? Like where you're not putting anything on the object, you're just like using light to extract information from it.
Okay.
Is that it?
I have a question. Is Ethereum your preferred choice right now just because it's established and maybe more understood, or are you looking at, I mean, any of you and any other platforms that are out there like EOS or, you know, anything that would enable smart contracts, or are you sticking with Ethereum?
We're looking at Hyperledger Sawtooth as well.
I think it depends, again, and coming back to Karen's point from before, it depends on what you're trying to build. If you're building something that consumers will use, I think Ethereum has a clear edge, and that's why I probably chose Ethereum, because you have more tools, you have more consumers that understand it, you can put it in front of more people. Bitcoin it's always also an option, but it's harder to program it, right? So it's less programmable from that perspective, right? So, but if you're going to build something that's more for a business-to-business case, then Hyperledger may make more sense, right? So, kind of depends on what you're trying to build.
Yeah. We do a lot of work from a transactional side with Stellar as well.
Which is great for transactions.
So it depends on what you're looking for.
I don't think is the Ethereum standard for non-fungible tokens, is it finalized now?
Yeah.
It has been finalized? Okay.
Yeah, it has. Yeah, and you know, there's a standard implementations of it too, which kind of makes it easy to use as well. You don't have to build the whole smart contract from.
Okay.
All right.
All right.
Right.
Thank you.
That's
See you
it.
guys.
Thank you.
Great, this is a great audience, thank you. A lot more fun when people talk, you know?
Yeah, it's great to hear what you're all doing. So, on the subject of different blockchain platforms, there are lots of them out there. We've got actually a session this afternoon which has got short presentations from 3 of them, which have got big presences here in town: Decred, Digibyte, and NIM. So they're relatively new to the scene. There's a bundle of other action happening. So we've got there's a Tezos meetup happening later this month. There's an EOS hackathon happening soon. There's a LISC hackathon next month. Yeah, there's kind of, I mean, you can get well and truly confused over what blockchain platform to use, but I certainly invite you to do that. Great, thanks for all for coming. We're going to be getting the room set up for the next session at 12:30 about looking at blockchain for social impact projects. So get a drink, take a break, and see you back at 12:30. Thanks a lot.
Awesome, thank you.
Thanks, everybody.
next week.
Yeah, that would be
One
good.
more thing, there's a happy hour happening at 5 o'clock.
You have my contact.
Yeah,
Yeah, so you can just stop in and take a look and we can talk. I can get you introduced to McKenna's our curator too and see, but I'd love to talk to him if there's a way to put your friends and plug that in as a way to get more revenue.
Super, yes, I do remember.
Yeah, you know, it's, hi.
How you doing?
Thank you so much.
I'm Jeremy.
Dave Brooks here. Hi, Dave.
Okay.
Thank you so much. Thank you.
Yeah, I'm a local web developer, and I'm
Okay,
interested in doing
that'd be
more
very
in the
cool. Thank you.
blockchain space, so keep that in mind.
Okay.
Okay.
Any direction, anything new, or anything you think I might
Yeah.
need to know, please let me know.
Okay.
I appreciate it. Thank you so much.
All right. Very good.
Did you enjoy the talk?
Yes, yes. I took a lot of good notes, and I gotta go back and digest them all.
It's an interesting perspective, where it's like, when you start to dig into how many different people are doing different things, like if they all come together.
Okay.
I like that it's
Sounds
all
good.
still brand new and
Yeah.
Yeah, I'll be here.
Lots of opportunity.
still kind of a wild west.
Yeah, a little bit.
I guess.
Well, thank you again.
Yeah, thank you.
Questions that I've started asking about that, but love to get some more
Thanks
ideas.
for that. Interesting project.
Thank you.
Yeah.
Yeah.
It took me a little while to kind of like wrap my head around it. But
Are you?
It's a little man.
Are you?
a little bit, yeah.
The music.
But it seems like the music, like this layer, the actual art itself is actually just like one basic layer of the system, which is the real art part. You're very focused on how.
Sounds like.
I don't know. I feel like the non-fungible aspect was the part that was most interesting, because I don't hear about that very much, right? Like we only hear about it usually in terms of like a replacement for the dollar. You know, using blockchain. But with this, it's you know, it gets you thinking about other ways we assess value and assign it to objects.
Yeah, like, you know, it's a big word people are talking about now. It's like everybody talks about tokenization, right? Of physical assets. The idea of like, hey, this building already renting out spaces. How many places can you rent the different spaces in this building?
Right.
And each of them is unique.
Right. So that's the problem, right, with tokenization, because like if you just tokenize everything, it's all the same value, then everything is equal. You know what I mean? But if you have other ways to measure value, there's still an interpretive aspect, right? It's not like the value of your art is set by how long it's been there or any of those other things, but it is more clear for the human interpretation because that trail is there, right? Like so you're an assessor, right? Who's what do you call it? The person that says
Or curator.
Yeah. Or I guess I was thinking of it's the same for a house. You go and like judge how much your house is worth.
Like an
appraiser, right? So an appraiser comes and judges the art, right? They can look at that blockchain and they can help them make their decision. Right.
It becomes more transparent. Think about it. Like in all these different industries, you can apply this. Different ways you can apply this. Say, at the end of the day, it's like making our markets more transparent, more interoperable, more efficient.
Well, yeah, and I'm kind of thinking ahead to, because we're going to use digital fabrication. There's a point probably not too far in the future where, you know, we'll have robots that can, you know, build things, right, that are based off of artist designs, but how are you going to track that, right? How are you going to track who makes that, you know, who's going to make money off
about this chair.
Right.
There's only one of those chairs.
Exactly. Right.
Maybe there's a set of
Right, or maybe there's or maybe artists could be the one that creates an ecosystem of chairs that have slightly different designs, right? But then can get credits for all of them if they have that blockchain to kind of track that back. And that can still be a way for the human element
and I think there has to be
remain
one
in the
master
physical
or something.
world, even as the artist is more separated from the making of the art.
Right. Yeah, the whole idea of
I think they're gonna come down.
I think
It's really interesting.
central
They
idea
just,
is
they just blew my mind.
but you know,
I'm not
it's
really
not
sure
just
what to make of it.
anyone can query the data.
I've been
No
following
one can
Walmart
change it. Right. So as soon as you're writing stuff
and
make
Walmart's
it easily available to get different
their
contracts,
vendors
the
that
code for that
supply like lettuce and spinach
I
to
think
sign
that's a
up
powerful
for
combination
blockchain,
that
but
they
it's
also
not the
want to
typical
say
one. It's the
where it's something in whatever the
smart
history of that
something like that.
Right.
I
think that makes sense, yeah.
It makes it less secure. You know,
There must be a scaling thing to the level where it's $10,000 a month, you know, like all kinds of I just saw it yesterday. I'm not sure what get into that.
If they get 10,000 or 10,000.
Yeah, and I see it too. Like obviously, it's not going to be picked up tomorrow, but it is functioning as an example of what it could be, and therefore, in the same way that like you know, you think of you know those people that did in the 1950s did like futurist art. You know, it's not necessarily that became our future, but it was a thought experiment, right? It was like a way
for me, I was kind of
for all their other projects, that like to have this one other service
very naturally. This is what I
probably not high implementing cost. Is this, we don't see that make sense?
money, or is it? It's a side project.
Yeah. What's your main industry?
Yeah, so I have a couple other startups.
Oh, what?
A couple other startups. I'm looking for opportunities as well.
What's that?
I'm kind of looking for what's next.
Yeah, my company's
Okay. I was wanting to get into the blockchain space without getting bad investments.
Okay, yeah. Are your startups in blockchain or?
No, the other ones are not. Our satellite is on blockchain. I have other stuff in blockchain.
Okay. Are you based out of Austin or?
Yeah.
Oh yeah. Yeah, it's tall.
Tall?
Yeah.
Okay.
Yeah.
I'll give you a card.
Sure. Yeah. Yeah, I'm a writer and I have a podcast. And
there's a fair amount of
the podcast on technology and society. I'm actually sorry that the shop I'm picking it up for, so I don't have one today.
Don't worry about it. Yes. Yeah, that's my other venture. I help founders build products. I build products. Love to be in your podcast or something like that.
Yeah, could work.
Hi, Chris. I'm guessing you're Paul.
Alright, yes.
Based on your vest.
Thank you all guys. And yeah, see you around.
All right, so thanks for joining me today, everyone.
Thank you.
Wonderful. Awesome. So if I have any technical problems, I go to him?
Exactly.
Awesome.
Yeah.
Okay. So I'm guessing this is the laptop we're supposed to be using?
Yes.
I'll find out from you. So kind of as like covered in the email, what we're going to do is I'm going to give a brief overview of, you know, how blockchain can have an impact, kind of a little overview of the space, and then we'll do, you know, roughly 10 to 12 minute talks from each of you guys about, you know, how what you guys are doing, leverage blockchain has, you know, some impact in the world. We'll have a few questions after that for each of you, and then at the end we'll switch over to a panel and I'll have some questions for you guys. I'll take in more from the audience.
Awesome.
Sound good?
You got my slides?
I do have slides, yes. George slides are just, you've done this long enough.
Well, it's not about winging. We weren't told to bring slides until the last minute, so.
But I'm familiar enough with that to know that we've got this stuff down.
Thank you.